listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
Live from across the divided states of America, it is time now for another edition, the last this week, in fact, of the most disruptive show covering news, politics, and events from across these disunited states we call America and the increasingly divided, fragmented, tectonically shifting surface of our globe. In the independent corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, that means you're listening to Fire That Keeps on Shining, The Ember in the Crack, Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. All right, we're workshopping that one. We're working on that intro over time. Anyway, in COVID news, specifically in COVID numbers, there are about 63,818 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. Also, about 362 new deaths over the past week. These numbers leave us with an average of about 45,343 cases per day. That's an increase of 180% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 56% of residents have received at least one dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 34,285,360 people across the United States. It's also killed 609,870 people here in the U.S. 31 children under the age of 12 tested positive for COVID-19 following an outbreak at a sleepaway camp in upstate New York. All of the children are too young to receive vaccines. The New York Times is reporting on this yesterday. On the one hand, an incredibly insignificant thing. On the other hand, it's kids getting sick, and they're getting sick because they're not getting vaccinated. And I'm sure the New York Times is like, hey, maybe we should vaccinate these kids, which is a culturally contentious issue, obviously, right, Jamarl?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah.
Some people don't want their kids vaccinated. By the same token, some people do because stuff like this happens.
Yeah.
Also, there's this thing of people who believe that children can't get sick for some reason. And I don't quite know why they believe that. Or at the very least that there aren't vectors to transmit it. Like you said, none of these kids died. None of them got uber ill. But could they have transferred it to somebody who could have? Absolutely, of course.
Possibly.
Yeah. And if you're thinking about, okay, what do schools look like? Well, this is proof of concept that schools could get. The Delta variant could run roughshod within the context of a school, like anywhere else. So, yeah, 31 is not a huge number, but the fact that they got sick at all is breaks the convention.
Yeah, and it's all at a camp, and so the thought is, okay, people are going to camps again, kids are getting out again, people are getting out again in general, we're going to be circulating, and therefore the virus is going to be circulating too. And, it plays into this whole, the vaccine thing.
Well,
a conversation we're a part
new
of.
mask mandates.
Yes.
Have you heard that?
Of course. I heard them talking about vaccine mandates on the TV this morning.
I mean,
they're stepping it up.
They are, they're looking at the numbers go up and they're like, okay, what are we going to do? Do we wait? And especially when you have proof of concept of the 5,000 people dying a day. It's that where it's like, okay, we can't fail on this. Even from just a political perspective.
Yeah.
We can't fail on that stuff.
Well, because this crisis, we'll come back to this. A brief comment just to come back to later. We're maybe a year and a half or something like that into a much longer economic and political and social crisis. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
This is and the virus is still going, and so depending on how countries play this specific timeout, it'll affect how well they weather that crisis.
Yes.
But a topic maybe for another time. Continuing on briefly with COVID news, this week 40% of all new COVID cases in the U.S. came from just 3 states. Those were Florida, Missouri, and Texas. Florida was 48% fully vaccinated. Missouri 40% vaccinated. Texas is 43% fully vaxxed. In national news here in the States, at least 8 were shot in Chicago on Wednesday night, just before midnight, in the 3rd mass shooting in 6 hours in the city. This comes on the same day as the Justice Department launched gun trafficking strike forces in 5 cities, including Chicago, also Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C., and the San Francisco Bay Area. Meanwhile, in D.C. last night, there was a shooting in the Logan Circle neighborhood on 14th Street in front of Mexico that left 2 wounded. I'm getting so specific because I live 5 blocks away from there. And so somebody let me know, hey, there was a shooting right where you live. And sure enough,
it focuses the mind.
Yes, it does. Yeah, I didn't hear anything. I heard sirens going off anyway. And I got shot. I didn't realize it until later. I'm just kidding.
A leg wound.
Exactly.
But I care so much about doing the news.
I thought it was mosquito bite. I'm just that much of a...
My wife used to say her dad used to eat nails and stuff like that. It's like I'm so that much of a man that I dragged myself into work.
It's the old. Those are the old iron supplements, right? Yeah. In other national news, Jeff Bezos gave $100 million each to Van Jones and a chef. Yes, you heard that right.
What?
CNN's Van Jones and a chef.
$100 million.
Mm-hmm. Because
that means Jeff Bezos has too much money.
Maybe. Or he said that he sort of tried to tease something. He said he's giving it to these people because he says they're brave and they bring people together in a time of deep conflict. But I don't know how many people Van Jones is really bringing together.
Whatever. I think he got a lot of pressure from going in that penis craft
that's exactly
into
what
space.
happened. Yep.
And they're like, he has way too much money on his hands. Look at what the Amazon workers are going through. You got people. I think it's that. And it's like, all right, well, I give $100 million. But the fact that you can do that on a whim, he's going to give $100 million to Van Jones, and within a week, he's going to have his money back.
Maybe. Well, maybe. But the other side of this is he's like saying this is a teaser of like a competition or a contest or something. That's the way that I interpret it, at least.
Yeah.
That is to come, which, you know, if he's giving this money to them based on their ability to bring people together in difficult times, be noble or something like that, it sounds like he's trying to start a contest where he's trying to get random people to be noble, and then maybe he might select one person to receive $100 million or something. That seems like where that could be going.
I am not against. I mean, honestly, if I had that much money, I think I would probably do something similar. I would be like, all right, this guy is doing something that I think is utterly and entirely phenomenal. So here's a ton of money to do it. Now, how focused are you on that if you're thinking of Amazon or if you're thinking on Starlink or whatever else? I think Starlink is the other guy. But you get my point.
Yeah.
Like, look, I don't know if it's pressure. I don't know if it's, I just know if I had that much money, I think I would be doing stuff like you don't lose anything. Bezos is going to make this money back in no time. Like, that's the part of it. It's like, dude, if you were doing this, yes, this is good. The catch is, who do you give it to? Like, are you giving it to somebody to build some kind of organization to your own awesomeness? Or is it, no, he is going to do whatever he's going to do with this in order to try to make the world a better place.
It's the latter. It is no stipulations on the donation there.
Yeah.
And he said that to both of them. You can do whatever they want to with the money.
Excellent. Van Jones is going to... I'm just thinking like bongets and whatnot. He's just sitting in the room all day. And it's like, dude, are you going to use it? I'll get to it.
I am, buddy.
Yeah,
I'm raising the spiritual consciousness on this planet, man. I'm raising the...
Right.
No, I'm just kidding.
But no, that's... Look, it's an interesting idea. I don't see anything wrong with the idea. It's like, look, here's money. That person is trying to make the world a better place. Go for it.
Yes.
I'm okay with that.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's the thing. And there's another topic on like Bezos and not capitalism ideology, but like how people view business. If you're an ambitious person, and you're like, okay, I'm smart, I've got connections, my parents are wealthy, let me do some things with my privilege or whatever.
Yeah.
And even if it's not, obviously, it's not selfless. There's selfishness there too, but you're a human being. You've got some aspirations.
It's selfless in an absolute sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But you're both of those things. You're a human being.
Yeah.
Do you go into government, which seems to me to be largely stagnant, corrupt, and riddled with infighting, or do you go into business on the off chance that you become spectacularly wealthy and then can use your wealth to influence things? Clearly, it seems like the second path is chosen, at least by a lot of people. I'm not saying it's the right path, but a lot of people choose that path explicitly because they're like, I want to be powerful so I can influence the world. That seems to be very clear.
Yes.
Specifically with the people we're talking about, Bezos and Musk. Branson's a little bit more marginal, but whatever. Is that good? Is that right? Is that necessary? Is it true? There are all these questions we don't have time for right now, but there are interesting things about that are underneath the conversation about Bezos and Musk and this whole thing, because it seems like that's what they did, is they were kind of ambitious people who had some selfless ideas we could get into with Bezos, but is also selfish, wants profit, wants to be wealthy, probably wants to live a pretty damn comfortable life, that kind of thing. But it's both of those things, and they decided to pursue it, and it kind of makes sense for them. So does that make sense in an abstract sense? Maybe a topic for another time. In international news, the opening ceremony for the Summer Olympics in Tokyo is, I believe, taking place as we read this in a nearly empty stadium. It was due to start at 6:55 a.m. Eastern. Our time, that would have been within the last 15 minutes. And this is coming as the city of Tokyo is in a state of emergency due to high COVID case counts right now. This also came as they fired their creative director earlier this week over anti-Semitic comments he made over 2 decades ago within the few days before the start of the Olympics. In other words, they fired the creative person in charge of this stuff right before they started the actual Olympics. Kind of confusing, kind of reactive. In China, Chinese President Xi Jinping has paid a historically significant and culturally sensitive trip to Tibet. That's the first time the leader of China has visited the region in nearly 30 years. In the U.S., the United States has launched a number, in Afghanistan, the United States has launched a number of airstrikes against the Taliban in recent days, attacking near the southern province of Kandahar, which is kind of confusing. We've pulled out like 95% of our troops. We're planning on withdrawing there pretty soon, and yet it almost seems like we're intentionally poking the hornet's nest or something. We're not going to knock them out. We're just going to piss them off, which is just, who's going to have to deal with the after effects of that? Not us, the Afghan government, and any soldiers that are left in the region. Anyway, the conflict in the Tigray region of Ethiopia is growing. The 8-month-long conflict has now spilled into the neighboring region of Afar. In this neighboring region, at least 20 civilians have been killed, 54,000 people have reportedly been displaced, and experts are warning of a growing need for humanitarian aid, as they have been for a very long time, into Tigray itself. DC has opened its first Amazon Fresh store. The superstore is equipped with Just Walk Out technology, where the user will scan an app on their phone to enter, and everything they exit with is automatically charged to their Amazon account. You can find the store at 1733 14th Street Northwest. And I'm not going to get into that. It's in DC.
I've mentioned this so often. I've been mentioning this for months that this was going to take place. Because they were testing this technology like a year or so ago. Like walking into a store, automatically beams your card. You walk out. You don't have to, no checkout person is necessary. You may have a security guard.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah. And the same, again, Amazon Fresh. Who owns Whole Foods? Amazon.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's not just going to be them. Other technology, meaning 7-Eleven is going to have to compete with not having that many workers on staff. How is 7-Eleven going to compete with that? Are they going to lower wages, or are they going to adopt the same technology? Do you think the technology is going to stay with that, or move to McDonald's and fast food, etc.?
Or is 7-Eleven going to exist because they can't adapt quickly enough because they don't have the margins that Amazon does, and Amazon decides, hey, let's make our next project the better 7-Eleven. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like all of these things, like this is a new paradigm. Like this is like your typical thing. Hi, Bob. And you don't walk out of it. That's going away.
Just in time for COVID too, I guess.
Well, COVID makes it that much more.
Yeah.
It
expedites it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Incentivizes it all that much more. Those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And there we are.
I don't think people fully reconcile what that's going to mean. Like how that changes. Like the majority of the jobs right now are low-wage jobs. They're service jobs. And it's like, what happens when the service jobs start to bleed away because you don't need them? Like, I mean, the Amazon technology, I think people need to reconcile that. Right now, when they walk into, let's say, a grocery store, for 30, 40, 50 years, you would go through the aisles. You would have these huge aisles, and people are like, the kids are playing. It's like, don't touch anything, all that stuff. And then within a change of things, you have less checkout counters now. And then if you go to CVS or drugstores, less checkout counters. They would say, hey, you could go to those automated counters. And people may be dicey at first, but after a while, it's going to be the norm to go to those counters. Hiring people for cashiers is going to become less and less. And look, I think this is going to take place for service industries, fast food stores, for driving, meaning cars going across town and cars across the world. All of those jobs are going to go up in smoke. And I would estimate about 10 years. How does your society accommodate that? That's the question that our society is being hit with, and that's what that story nails. If something as simple as convenience stores are being augmented for the future, where we don't even need a person here, what about the other stores, and what does it mean for our society and our ability to accommodate it? That is a question we have not addressed. Even people like Sanders don't really touch that. I mean, that's a Yang stuff, but it's something we got to hit. Like, how can we not?
Yeah, it's true. Don't know what happens with it. I'll put it like this, though. Not saying people like, 7-Eleven at the checkout at a grocery store or whatever. If you're in lockdown, everybody's wearing masks. And then when you go to actually check out, you don't see a person there necessarily. It's like it's just weird how much more disconnected from each other we're getting.
It feels very weird.
You know what I mean?
And COVID, like I said, has made it worse. It has expedited that process big time. I mean, when is the last time? My wife just stopped going to the store. She just started doing Whole Foods. Yeah. And we did this for like a year. And this wasn't something we did prior. And it's like at the end of the process, it wasn't like, okay, we're starting back going to the store. It's the process just basically continues with the way it is. So you become that much more likely to buy stuff online. That much
ordering in, that's what you're talking about, right?
Right, yeah, exactly.
I did that briefly. It's just expensive. And then I always got the feeling like, I'm making this other person do this for me. They're taking the risk. And I get it. We shouldn't have contact. So it's like they've decided to take it on. But I remember the economic arguments back from early on in the pandemic. It's like, is this whole thing just the middle class, and I'm not trying to be denigratory because I've done this too, the middle class hiding while they get the working class to bring them things.
That's what it is.
I'll pay you to get sick and bring me my food.
That's what it is.
Yes.
I mean, because the person who's bringing it doesn't have a choice in the option. Meaning, okay, I can stay at home because I want to protect my family from COVID, but I can't feed my family now that I'm staying at home or pay for the home. It's that. Meaning, it's not a choice. But yes, the middle class staying at home.
An upgrade from that probably would be like automated robot vehicles. If the paradigm, I guess, is that we're all supposed to stay in our houses all the time, which of course isn't anymore. I'm not being too hyperbolic here.
During that time period,
then you want to have the robots do it so everybody can stay at home. At least it's egalitarian. And of course, that was, people been joking about that and arguing about that at the time. But it's weird, that residue. Like we were talking about the I brought up political, economic, and cultural effects of this crisis that we're going through. Like, arguably, we're a year and a half into not just probably an inflationary and debt problem that could turn into an economic crisis, and may already be one. We'll see. Obviously, politics has been fractured and doesn't show any signs of getting better. Biden's getting absolutely nothing done, just taking the parochial view here in the United States. And then culturally, again, the culture war was already happening. Last summer, riddled with riots. Things seem to have, gone into a simmering mode or whatever. But the fundamental causes of the culture war haven't gone away at all. No. It's just people are isolated from each other. And I think people are excited to be outside again. And so we're less bickering, less arguing with each other. And Biden. And it's Biden instead of Trump. And Trump was inherently, there was a tension. He shouldn't have been in the presidency was the feeling. And so everything felt wrong. People were fighting about this. At least a lot of I don't know. You get my point.
No, I get your point. It was chaos.
Yeah. And we're
utter chaos.
It's
we're
a
just
crisis.
pulling out of it.
It's a crisis that we've entered into, and I don't think we're pulling out of it. This is the thing. When people talk about going back to normal, I'm not saying you've said this recently or anything like that. It doesn't make any sense to me. We're so far, we're still on the trajectory away from normal, and we'll be that way for quite a while. And when we've gone so far on that trajectory, we're never getting back. Is my point.
Yeah, I mean, you can make an argument that there's no such thing as normality just because, there's nowhere to ever really go back to, even though people always have these fondest ideas for the past or those type of things. Look, I think I agree with you. I mean, even for this just small case of Amazon automation, even that, I mean, even though it's small, it's like, okay, but what does it mean going forward? Well, it means that what you consider to be normal, even in just your basic corner store, is going to be different. There is no, there's no way to go back to per se. And that doesn't even touch the 600,000 people that have dropped dead. Like, those people are no longer on the planet. Meaning, so I get the normality argument. We've had more people that have died in COVID than wars, and that's just in 1 year.
Yeah.
And so, the normality thing is a little dicey to try to get back to in the first place. I think when people talk about normality, though, what they mean is, okay, I can go outside and go to a restaurant. I think it's just the very basic, lowest common denominator. I can feel the sunlight and I can look at somebody else without having this diaper on my face, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And so I think it's that part. But I feel you. I don't. Normality it's going to be a while. And I don't think the fact that we have these variants right now and the Delta variant is spiking in the numbers, it doesn't get the feel that this is going to be, okay, in a month, we're good. It doesn't feel that way.
No. And this was like, if you remember last year, there was a point when we were trying to figure out exactly how long this whole problem would last. And I was thinking,
it was like, the beginning of next year, stuff like that.
I didn't see it being less than a year, but I could have seen it being over early, this spring, for instance. You weather the winter, cases drop down, late winter, that kind of thing. And
70% vaccination rate.
Something like that,
stuff,
we hit spring and we're like good to go for the most part. Sure, a few borderline cases, but we don't have this big concern that the pandemic is going to resurge, you know what I mean? But that was the minimum time. We're past that, and there's no end in sight at this point, and we don't have any real promise. It's not even years. And again, I'm not trying to be hyperbolic here, but literally, I'm not saying that we're going to be in constant lockdown or the pandemic's going to be this severe, but of course, you get what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that we're going to be living with it, suffering from it, still being locked down in some ways, still having some of our civil liberties persecuted. A lot more people are going to be dying than should be based on getting COVID. It's all of that stuff together. We got to go into a break, though.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
When the going gets tough, the powerful want propaganda. But we won't let them cancel the facts. Whether you're woke or drowsy, we know that you can handle the truth, and we're giving it to you every morning. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan every Monday through Friday from 7 to 10 a.m. Eastern. Your first stop for sanity in a world gone mad.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. I was going to do a show or going to do this monologue on Killamede and this notion of individual liberty and everything else, because we ended up in a conversation with it in the back room the other day where it was pointed out to me that, hey, if somebody squints, they may think that you've contradicted yourself there with the individual liberty argument versus going after Killamede for his, basically, I don't want to wear a mask and that type of stuff. There's a distinction, and I made the distinction in the show. And this bothered me more, and so I kind of want to move on to this. I called Shane yesterday, I think, and I was like, dude, there have been 3 mass shootings in Chicago in 6 hours. Now, when you say that, you're like, wait, somebody and multiple people at the same or around the same time, within 6 hours, 8 hours of each other, decided to grab a weapon and to go out and in the frame of mind, end somebody else's life, and to do so in mass numbers. Meaning it wasn't even, I'm going to settle a grudge with one individual. It was a lot of people, for whatever particular reason, in a particular city and around the same time, deciding to settle their grievances with a weapon. In Chicago, we often hear about the shootings and the mass killings in Chicago and everything else. I mean, they even call it Chirac, for that matter, this notion of war zone in Iraq and comparing it to Chicago. When George Floyd was killed, and you had all of these people marching and everything else, and I understood it. A man kneels on another man's throat for 9 minutes with other human beings watching that travesty of justice, immorality take place without necessarily doing anything other than videotaping because of the cultural mindset that we have in regards to cops. People lose it. People get angry. People march, not just in the United States, across the world, all 50 states. People got engaged. They were very angry about what took place. 1,000 people getting killed a year. That is a travesty of justice, especially from the people who are supposed to be the meters or meeting out of that justice. Yeah, it's horrific. It's horrendous. It should not be something that is allowed. However, 4 shootings in Chicago within a few hours is just as bad, and it also should not be allowed. Understand what I'm saying here. You have individuals, human beings, that are living in situations that look like a war zone. These aren't everybody that is engaged in fighting and everything else. Most people are just trying to live and make their ends meet, going from point A to point B in the way they live their life. But they're living in a horrible, horrible situation. 4 shootings, 3 dead, 17 injured, including a party bus in Chicago. And it seems like we hear these shootings and these killings take place constantly. This is not even somewhat of a shocking story of the fact that all of these people were shot or killed, or that it's coming out of Chicago. The only interesting part is that all of it was taking place in such a short period of time. Different, independent cases, short period of time, killings. Is this okay? And why are we perfectly okay with accepting one, but not the other? Meaning, I get that it's a travesty of justice that a cop kills somebody. That is horrific. And the idea that you have 1,000 killings a year is something that is unparalleled in Western society, per se. If you look at the UK, I think it was like 1 or 2. It doesn't even come close, even the number of people who we're putting into our prisons. But I'm asking something different. When that 13-year-old kid, I think it was Adam, that got shot by the cop or got killed by that cop, and people browbeat the cop, how dare that cop does it, and I agree with him. Cop shouldn't have killed him. By the same token, does it not bother you to any degree that a 13-year-old is walking around with a weapon, with a gun? And not just a 13-year-old is walking around with a gun. When you're looking at the shootings and everything else that seems to be taking place rather periodically here, you have to ask yourself, who is living in those situations? And why is the situation like that? And why, more importantly, is it acceptable? Why is this acceptable? You have people living in this situation. These are people who say, I want to live in a situation where all of these people are being killed around me, or where bullets are flying around me, or my kids are living in this situation. When that kid got shot and had the gun, I was horrified. As a parent, I have dog kids, but even with dog kids, I was horrified. Why is a 13-year-old walking around with a gun? And what would my mom think? What would any parent think? Would any parent want their kid walking around with a weapon like that? And more importantly, is that normal? Is it normal for people in that area, for kids or whatever else, to do that? And if so, should it be? If so, why? If so, why isn't this an outrage? Why doesn't this warrant people, masses of people, marching, saying this is horrendous? How do we have a place in the United States, richest country on the planet, yet bridges falling? And, yes, people murdering each other in large measure. I think the question that I'm getting here is why? Why is it acceptable in the first place? But on point of why is it acceptable, why are we okay with this? Why are we okay with this? I would imagine that the people who are living in the community are not okay with it, but I would imagine that if they had any kind of agency or option, they would be doing something else. Why are we in this country okay with one of our major cities being basically colloquially considered a war zone? And on some level, in a physical matter of reality, we're just looking at the reporting, they're not necessarily wrong in that association. Should this not also warrant outrage, anger, marching? Why are our communities in disrepute like this? That is a big deal, and that's something that needs to be addressed. And every bit as much as it's aggravating for a cop to kill somebody, it is also aggravating for me to see a community that is basically in this much disrepute. And again, some of these were kids. Right here, a 14-year-old boy and 2 other people were killed, and 17 people were injured in 4 separate shootings in Chicago on Wednesday. Being a child is not even a defense. We need to accommodate this. We need to figure this out. And I would point to you, and yeah, a lot of this I always point to poverty because I think poverty is one of the main drivers. But I would wager to you, when you go through and figure out what were the communities that were being, that were under duress, what were the people, or who were the people that were shot, and where were they being shot? And if you aggregate that all across the United States, one of the decided trends that you will see is poverty. Impoverished communities. If you can get rid of 30 or 40% of the crime just by getting rid of poverty, why wouldn't you do that? And I suspect it will be higher than that because I suspect there will be downstream effects. My main point, though, is Chicago and the number of killings should be an outrage. An outrage. And I'm not saying that from the perspective of the right wing where they're just browbeating Chicago because they want to make up a point of nonsense. I am saying that from the perspective that there are real human beings that are living in those communities that should not have to deal with this. Shane, what are your thoughts? You're going to disagree with me. You're going to say that people should have to deal with those shootings and should have to deal with walking through a war. I'm teasing. I'm joking. No, what are your thoughts? I'm totally teasing about the country.
Well, for one thing, I don't think anybody likes the situation.
No.
I think that would include the people who are profiting it from the most, which are arguably the most successful criminals locally. They probably don't like the situation, even though it benefits them. But maybe I'm reading into it.
But the government. So yes, so fair enough. I think all crime is rational.
And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe there are people who like crime, and maybe I'm being unempathetic.
Well, I think the people who are doing it and profiting from it are liking it on some level.
Yeah, maybe. But I also feel like there's this sense of this is really screwed up, and we were, I don't know. If I had some better option, if instead of making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year doing this, I could make hundreds of thousands of dollars a year doing something similarly exciting but legal that I can do for decades and raise a family on. Some of those people would probably make the switch. Not all of them, maybe, but some of them.
Well, that's what I think crime is rational. I think all crime is rational.
Maybe. But on this topic generally, you're talking about a war on poverty, or not a war on poverty. You're talking about solving poverty. That would be something like a war on poverty. As far as I can tell, we have lost every single war on abstract nouns that we fought, whether it's the war on terror or the war on drugs or the war on cancer or the war on crime or the war on poverty, which Lyndon B. Johnson tried to fight and which, along with the Vietnam War, put us into the 70s, sent us into a recession. It was expensive as hell. And for all the MMT folks who are like, we can just spend as much money as we want to. And horses are actually the descendants of unicorns. And if you just pet them right, their horn will shoot out of their... No, I'm just kidding. But my point is, it's unreasonable. It's unrealistic, of course. and therefore it's not as easy. And okay, is the solution to it more police or more money, broadly speaking? And then each side sort of lumps itself into one of those two categories. And enough of either one would probably work, but each of those is actually pretty expensive, and it takes a long process, and everybody's arguing over what exactly we're supposed to do, so I don't see any sign that this is going to get better. But when you say that we're okay with it, the public isn't okay with it, the politicians are the ones with the most power, and therefore they technically tolerate it, but I don't think they have any clue, really, practically, how they can solve that problem, because it's a damn big city with a lot of people who are killing each other on a constant basis, and no one politician can save them, either through police or through cash injections.
I don't think it's one or the other, meaning I don't think all of police or all of it. In fact, I would, as a flat fact, would say dropping in police is not going to solve the problem, because that's what they've basically done for the last 40 years.
Yeah.
And
having said that, we should do more. Having said all of that, we should do more. I'm sorry for interrupting.
I know your thing is like what? And I think for me, look, poverty is the more complicated one. I agree with you. It's more complicated. The police one is easier. And, you know, we have the Batman syndrome. We are perfectly okay with putting in cops to be tough. Like, listen to Joe Biden's old speeches. You know, I gave you the ability to execute people, and the president wasn't doing it. Why? Because the society is perfectly okay with it being tough. We're putting people in prison longer. Why? Society is perfectly okay with being tough. When you get into, like, Lori Lightfoot and stuff like that, and you get these, I look at that and I think to myself, yeah, on some level, the society has to be okay with it. Meaning the mayors, the governors, and all these people. On some level, they have to be okay with it. I mean, and you could say, well, they're okay with it because they can't figure out how to solve it. Fair enough. I would say that if you know that the poverty thing, I mean, yeah, LBJ had the war on poverty. Martin Luther King made the point, though, that he hit his head on the shores of the Vietnam. Meaning you can't do both. You need to pick a pony in regards to which one you're going to prioritize. And from his standpoint, he prioritized the war. From the standpoint of a war on poverty, I don't think I use the term war. I mean, for me, I look at it as, how do you keep communities from falling apart? And if you have a school that is falling apart, then the kids who are probably going there are probably not going to be the best. And I don't mean this from the standpoint of the character of the kid. I'm saying the conditions that you're putting the kids in, that you require them to grow, expand, and develop in, you're giving them adverse scenarios that they have to expand and exceed and beyond, go past. I'm saying that if you're going to have a school that's going to be messed up, it's not shocking that you're going to have people in that school that are also going to be messed up. The conditions are screwed up. I mean, like the community itself, if you have a dirt poor community that doesn't necessarily have the services, that doesn't necessarily have the jobs available, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, then what do we expect? Then what do we expect? Like meaning if Chicago, you would expect Chicago to be the way Chicago is based on the conditions that are on the ground in Chicago. That's the point that I'm getting at. And if we wanted something else, we would have to have a different environment to give people something else. I don't have this belief that people, look, I don't think people are robots, but I think the environment that you put people in have a decidedly higher factor in regards to how those people turn out and the conditions that those people end up perpetuating. I think Chicago is no different. I think for Chicago to change, you have to change what it means for Chicago to operate. And yeah, I think the key driver to that is poverty. Now you would say, well, that's difficult to do. I agree.
Okay, so here it's difficult to do, and I don't think our political system handles it very well, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try to improve upon it, or we shouldn't try to improve our political system generally, so it can improve upon that, you know, so it can solve that problem better. It's just,
like, for example,
this stuff is complicated.
Like somebody would say, okay, that school is failing. It's like, okay, well, what about the community? Well, the community is failing too. So you expect to have an awesome school in a community that's failing. Like, you can't have it both ways. This stuff isn't magic. It's like...
No, but we understand this. I don't think anybody. This stuff is all, as far as I can tell, it's all common sense. And I would say that there are a lot of people who don't like how our present population is treated, and you know many of them, and it's double-digit percentage, and arguably a majority of people, if you actually ask them about it. When you say our society is okay with things, I'll put it like this:
our political system accepts this. But that's the point.
We all know somebody who has problems. They're older. They might be fat. They probably smoke a lot of different things, either cigarettes or whatever. They smoke a lot of different stuff. It all comes together, and they're like not doing very well physically. They probably have social problems, and a lot of their relationships are frayed. I'm just putting into your mind somebody who has problems, but also potential. Yeah. And if they could solve their problems, they'd live a much better life, and a happier life, and they'd be doing much better. I'm postulating this. Now, how do you help that person? Nobody knows. I'm serious. You can technically say, okay, you get on an exercise regimen, and you change your diet, and you're going to be much better. But how do you get them there? Nobody knows. Everybody's different. We don't know how to get them. Some people are impossible to change. Other people, you just say the right words. Other people, you put them into a boot camp, etc. My point is, The same, I think, applies to society. We don't know actually how to solve a lot of these problems because a lot of these problems are unique, and our politicians, in the same way that if I'm dealing with this person, often my tendency is wrong. I try to say certain things to them and it fails completely.
Yes.
And in that sense, I am a politician. I'm trying something that I think will work, but it doesn't. It's based on my own personal experience. It's limited. It's probably not going to work. And at the end of the day, I don't really care. But I care a bit, but like.
But are you really doing it for the person's interests? Meaning, as a politician.
Ideally, you do.
Here's the thing. As a politician, they're not typically working entirely from selflessness. And I don't think you would believe that the politician is working purely from the state of selflessness.
No, of course not.
And so it's like when these guys are trying to engage a problem and they're throwing in cops is the easier way to do it. Cops is the simplistic way. That's the way that the audience and the members of the crowd and the public get. But the moment that you go into more complicated, like, okay, well, we're going to do this social program to do this, you're going to be attacked.
I don't know about that.
You're weak on crime. You're weak on this.
But you can be attacked for doing the same thing with crime. I think that it's easy to write a check and create a social program in a lot of cases. The problem is, in the same way that a lot of cops coming into communities fail to solve any problems, a lot of specific social problems also fail to solve problems.
But
and that doesn't mean they're not good.
I'm making the point I'm making the point that from the standpoint of the way our government has dealt with this over the course of the last 40 years, and again, I'm pointing to Joe Biden as a great example of that, looking at his speech over the time, it was far easier to be tough. Democrats were continuously attacked for being weak on crime, weak on foreign policy, weak, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so for them, toughness is beefing up the police force, crime. Even right now, why do you think they keep saying, oh, these guys are trying to defund the police, they're being weak on crime, et cetera, et cetera? It's the weakness is the part that is far harder to defend against.
You've got good points against the other side, but they've got good points against you too, and it's easy to weak
you mean the programs? No, I'm not strawmanning or anything like that. I'm making the point of crime. When we're getting into social programs and everything else, the assumption, I don't assume that they're working from this purely selfless spot. I'm assuming that there's all sorts of incentives that are people putting money in their pocket.
Of course.
People doing, meaning the person is not working from the selfless space. There's all sorts of things that are pulling and everything else in opposition, trying to push against it. It's not a perfect process. That's my point.
Want to go to our guest?
Yeah.
Yeah, because I think I see on the line, we should go to our guest. Let's do it. We're a couple minutes over time here. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're coming back with Mark Frost, formerly libertarian economist and many other things. We're going to be talking about inflation as it's rising, whether it's here to stay. We're also going to be hitting the housing market with Mark revealed to me he thinks may crash as soon as 2022. So we're going to be getting into some of his reasoning for why he's thinking that. Hope I'm up to date here, Mark. You might have changed your mind. Anyway, we'll be coming back with Mark on the other side of this break. Be back in just a minute.
Fault Lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Are you bored? Are you lonely? Do you need a hug? Well, we can't give you that, but we can keep you up to date on Radio Sputnik.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and we are joined by Mark Frost. He's an economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout Marine, a capitalist, a Schimpetarian, and a recovering libertarian, who you could at one point have followed on Twitter, but I believe he's taking a break right now still. Mark, thank you for joining us. How are you doing this morning?
Good morning. I'm doing quite well, and you guys are on fire this morning.
Hey, thank you. Thank you.
Unicorns till you get the system that you tolerate.
Both of those things. And hopefully if you tolerate horses for long enough, they turn into unicorns, but that hasn't happened yet. Anyway, non sequiturs aside, Mark, I'm going to hit you with a hard one here. I remember a couple of months ago, you were talking about helicopter money. You were talking about, okay, we're in an economic crisis right now. People have been kept at home, unable to work. The government's kept them from working. They have income that they could have made that they've lost. Therefore, in some sense, the government, which is keeping them from working, owes them compensation. And you were pushing for tens of thousands of dollars, I believe, at a time when many were pushing for thousands or even hundreds. So you were pushing for money to be spent by the government. Crackhead bod comes back to mind. We can explain that if we need to. My point is I'm setting that up. Now we have inflation. And my question for you, Mark, again, it's a hard one. Wouldn't that money have led to even more inflation? You know, assuming a lot of inflation is a bad thing, it's bad for young people, it's bad for different parts of society, bad for the economy broadly, too much inflation. Wouldn't that have, been the natural result of that program, Mark?
No, because if I was king, first of all, we wouldn't have had the shutdowns. So what my argument was conditional probability or conditional logic, in the sense, given the shutdowns, given that we've forced people to not work, people like me that were forced to not work, actually, I was never forced to not work. My life didn't change much at all. But for a regular, normal person, their life changed dramatically. Their livelihood was ripped from them by the police power of the state. Let's just call it what it was. Now, if you're going to do that, my gripe with the bailouts wasn't that we had bailouts. It's that the money didn't go to the people who truly needed it worse, without spending any additional money, without even printing any money by the Fed. And that wasn't done to help, John Q. Public. That was done to make sure the banks didn't get in trouble and to save big business. So if you have a person with 3 kids, head of household, and they're making $25,000 a year, and you take their job away from them, they probably don't have large savings. They probably don't have a very long burn rate. And so in my view, and this is when I take, when I take the economist hat off and I put on the philosopher's hat, and I say, what do we owe these people given that we took something from them? So I was never advocating welfare.
Okay, so wait on a second. This is what I wanted to... Is this a moral, was at the time and still to this day, was this a moral judgment or a recommendation here? Or was there also an economic, in other words, is this an economically positive move for our economy? Or do you see this primarily as a moral thing, even if we make some sacrifices for the economy, Mark?
Well, it's both. If you are going to say sacrifice for the economy, the sacrificial lamb should not be the least powerful people in the country.
Yeah.
So it's impossible to completely disconnect morality from economics, even though we economists try really hard to do that. But it's impossible to do that. So given the choice of shutdowns, it seems to me we have a moral obligation to compensate people for what we took. Now, I believe what I was talking about with Crackhead Bob is, at the time, everybody was paranoid. It's kind of like Jamarl was talking about war on drugs or tough on crime. At that particular time, it seemed like people were going to have an apocalyptic stroke if Crackhead Bob got $2,000, as if that was going to destroy and demean the entire effort of helping people that needed help. In any mass distribution like that, in any mass institutional action, you're going to have type 2 errors. You're going to give money to some people that, in retrospect, in an ideal, perfect system, you would wish you wouldn't have.
That is a false positive, isn't it? A type 2 error?
Sure.
And I think, yeah, because this has always confused me. It's like, which is which? Type 1, false negative, type 2, false positive. And again, most people probably understand this, so I won't explain those, but that's what you mean by that, right?
Right. And, what we should have done was, because I think I was on your show about 18 months ago, and I said something to the effect of, we don't have a problem of capital. The country is awash in capital right now.
That's true.
Right.
We should raise taxes on, and I wasn't talking about 90% ridiculous tax rates. I was talking about, we have a crisis in our country. We have these values that we want to pursue. We ought to pay for them. People like me should have, just like a homeowners association, if the retaining wall breaks, there's a special assessment. And the people that own that have the greatest interest in it, are the people that pay for it. Well, people like me should have had to pony up an extra 20 grand.
Yeah, no, Mark, but the fact that people have a certain degree of, let's say, power within a particular system is, part and parcel to the reason why they didn't have to do that. Meaning those values are the things that people say, not necessarily what happens in practice. What happens in practice is, okay, what is the bottom line? It becomes that. I am curious about something. You made the point of saying you didn't think they should shut down. What did you think? I mean, what do you think they should have done as opposed to the shutdowns? I mean, the shutdowns, meaning the shutdowns were done because of COVID. It wasn't done because of the mean government was just trying to do a power grab. So what would you have done in place of the shutdowns?
I would have not shut down at all. I would have worked on the vaccine. I would have, and if you did do, I would have targeted certain industries that seem to have the worst problem. We've had pandemics before in the past, And this isn't my area of expertise, but when the dust settles on this, we're going to look back in retrospect with 2020 vision. And I think it's already kind of, even in academia and my friends that do this, for instance, masks. We understand now that T-shirt masks do nothing.
No, T-shirt masks are stupid. But those are people being lazy.
One academic study that shows they do anything, and in fact, there's a couple now that show that they might have some marginal detriments. But as far as the shutdowns, we don't know that did anything. In fact, what one epidemiologist at my school is arguing is that they, in some situations, they might have made things worse, because what we do know now is that if you're outside, it's better than being inside.
Yeah, no, but what we also know is that number might have been up to 3 or 4 million people dead.
More than we had now.
Yes,
and
if the shutdowns didn't take place.
I think I'm more open to this argument a little bit more than Jamarl is. You know, for better or for worse, that maybe the lockdowns weren't 100% good or justified in retrospect. Having said that, at the time, I think they were a pretty reasonable move. It's just we should have hit them earlier and harder and more intensely to completely nip it in the bud if possible. That would have...
Well, you know, one reason why they were chosen was the absolute failure of the forecasting models of the epidemiologists. People were talking about exponential growth, and I was on your show, whenever it was, 18 months ago, 2 years ago, arguing that it wasn't exponential growth, that it wasn't sustainable, that my own forecasting was showing about 500,000 deaths, given I ran it through my linear forecasting models that I generally used for ATM machines. And I was checking it against a 3-day moving average from the previous days. And I was getting better results than they were, because they had an assumption of a 10% infection rate that never happened. It wasn't even close to that. And I didn't use that in my forecasting. So I was predicting about 500,000 deaths. At the time, on the high end, they were talking about 5 million deaths. Well, the central concept of abatement economics, something I am trained in, is the optimal quantity of a bad thing isn't zero. The optimal quantity of murder in a large city is not zero, because you'd have to have a police state to put it at zero. And then who's going to stop the police from murdering people? Well, now you need policing of the police. Eventually, the marginal cost of that in terms of money, time, liberty, sense of happiness is prohibitively high. You would rather have a small amount of murder than to get the last marginal murder abated.
No, I know what your point. I get your point. You're trying to say that, look, I mean, what of a society would you have left if you tried to get the rate of people and the transmission of it to zero? And A, you were never going to do it. And B, in order to do it, you would basically have to police state to force everybody to stay in their homes and shoot them if they comes out there. I get your point. And there's always a balance. It's always this kind of in-between, this subjective. I always say reality doesn't allow us any outs.
Balance.
By the same token, we can quibble over what that balance is. And what I do know is that there are 600,000 people that have dropped dead as a result of our actions or malfeasance of the government in regards to dealing with the issue. And so it seems reasonable to me to stay in the house if that's to abate 3 million people dead. That's my point. Like, what is on the other side of that to you, where you say, okay?
I'm not saying that it's not reasonable. What I'm saying is it's probably not rational, because because you have to consider the cost. It would be reasonable to have 1 mile an hour speed limits and have 5 million less injuries and 70,000 more live people. But we have decided as a society we would rather suffer those loss to human body and life and have fresh produce, have mobility, and be able to go to and fro at a relatively...
That's true. That's a balance, though, that we accept, because we have to kind of basically live, meaning I have to get to work because I need to be able to feed myself.
But who accepts it in that case?
Well, in this case, I accept it.
Well, the wealthy, the middle class, people who have the means to let the other people who don't make as much money, who don't have as much power as them, do all the work and face all the risk, right?
That's the other part.
That's the other part of it.
Full circle. You know, if we are going to have the shutdowns, which, again, I'll admit I was against. In retrospect, I'm still against them, but we had them. Well, given that we had them, what we should not have done is to engage the Fed in a printing of money unprecedented in this country. Already prices are just going nuts. I can tell you, I've sold my my payments company. That's all done now. So I can go back to Twitter, I guess.
Because it was like the board or something. You were being too controversial, and I think you just wanted to take a break, right, Mark?
Well, Twitter is a lot like the stay-at-home. Twitter is a lot like the shutdown economy. I think a lot of people that were working nights, weekends, doing a lot of different things, stayed home with their families and did other things, and they said, you know what? I don't want to go back to that. I don't want to go back to what I was doing before. And now that I've been off Twitter for a year, I'm like, do I really need that? Is that really what I want in my life? Because I'll tell you what Twitter does to me. This has nothing to, maybe Twitter's wonderful, but for me, it tends to push buttons and it makes me a worse person.
I hear you. Yeah, and I think we've had this conversation once or twice before, just briefly talking about you leaving it. But yeah, and my comeback back then, and we'll see how well it works, is it just depends on who you follow. It depends on the kind of communities you decide to create for yourself or something like that, who you choose to put in your mind. But I hear you on that. And especially if you're just wanting to keep tabs on things or pay attention or keep up to date, it is so easy to get awash in this volatile, bitter, vitriol. Anyway, Mark, we're talking about inflation. I want to pivot here because you said something kind of controversial to me the other day, which is you're looking at the housing market. You think that we are in a bubble. That's not controversial. That will crash next year. That is. Why do you see that? And do you still think that? What factors lead you to believe that, Mark?
Sure. I've been doing some research just for my own investments. I'm also always on the lookout for an academic paper, and I have a consulting company where people pay me to go look at stuff. So, and I'm an empirical guy. I like to measure things. Well, let's just talk about it. If you follow the mainstream media, let's say you watch CNN. Am I allowed to say that?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
I didn't know if I'm going to get you in legal trouble.
I don't think so. No.
And you're going to hear that home starts are at a record high, right? I mean, that's what you're going to hear. Biden administration is awesome. Everything's going great.
You said home starts, like first homes, right?
Yeah. Well, no, not first homes. Home starts. New home construction.
I see. Thank you.
Starts. Home building starts.
There we go. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So you hear that that's at an all-time high. Well, technically that's true. It is. Technically that is true. But guess what? Also is true. The median price of a home in the United States has never been higher than it is today.
Exactly. And real quick, Mark, I want to comment on this before I pass it back over to you because I know you're not finished. But it's not just due to high mortgage rates and inflation generally. It's also due to the specifics of the price of, for instance, lumber, which has gone up catastrophically, stratospherically, meteorically, over the past year. I think you've been watching. I'm guessing if you're paying attention to the housing market, you're going to be seeing that too. Price of 2x4s, all that gone through the roof.
Yes, but here's why I'm saying what I'm saying. Right now, today, the American dream is dead. And let's define the American dream as young people can own their first home without having to save up the money and buy one when they're 60. So home starts are at an all-time high. Median home prices are at an all-time high. But the number of starter homes, that is defined for first-time home buyers that are at or under the median income in the United States, are at a 5-decade low. I just throw out some statistics to you. In 1970, there was about 500,000 new units of entry-level housing. And entry-level housing is defined as 1,400 square feet or smaller. Last year, there was only 65,000. So new homes that are affordable to regular, normal people are not being built. What are the unintended consequences of that phenomena? Rent for working class people is going to go up.
I know, but Mark,
house prices of those currently built starter homes that are under 1,400 square feet, those are being bid up now for tear down. People, it's even around my neighborhood.
Mark, I am shocked by this conversation. Now, the reason why I'm shocked by this conversation is that it makes all the sense in the world that people would build things that are profitable to those people. And the housing market or any other market is not about building things that are for homeowners or for first-time homeowners any more than, McDonald's is about making hamburgers. Those are industries. They're markets. Their job is to maximize their profit. And if they believe they can do that by building homes that are not for first-time homeowners, they do that.
Usually the government engages in economic policy to incentivize the housing industry, as far as I can tell, to provide first home
that's
ownership,
fair,
that
but
kind of thing.
I'm getting on Mark and trying to understand. So do you believe that the government should get more involved in this, Mark?
The government already is involved in it because this is in part a function of the incentives and the regulatory structure that is around home building. And it's not necessarily the federal government. So look at almost any municipality. They're not zoning small homes in very often anymore. It's all McMansions. Go look at David Weekley's home starts. Look at what they're building. They're wanting... What's happening is cities are not allowing, essentially, through their zoning, starter homes basically being built.
And when we're talking about cities, the dynamic shifts from being national politics, not even state politics in a lot of cases. It's like a city, a municipality, a city council, a group of local people who are following guidance from above, sure, on like, here are best practices, these kinds of things. But they're making these decisions because they think that's going to improve the economy probably of their city. Why do they think that, Mark?
Because of the tax base. If you have homes that would have a mortgage payment around them of $400, $500 a month, or you can have a development of that land where you have mortgage payments of $3,000 a month, a lot of city planners zone out starter homes.
They go for that second one.
The place to go build starter homes is out in the country somewhere, and it's done in a way that concentrates poverty. And it's a shame that that happens. And this isn't really federal government policy. If there's anything we should have learned about politics, in the last couple of years, is states have a lot of power, and municipalities have a lot of power. In some ways, they have more power than the federal government has in certain particular topics and subjects. So my view is this: the Federal Reserve should not have printed so much money, because that's definitely caused inflation. It's also set the expectation of inflation, and anyone that follows me on this show knows that expectations are the driver of economics. I forecast an inverted yield curve coming up soon. Because it's almost certain now.
Well, wait, you're going to have to explain that to the public.
Well, here's the thing, Mark. We've only got like 2 minutes left. In fact, probably less than that at this point. And we still haven't gotten to the timing. What you said next year, 2022, you expect it's going to bust in that range. And I'm not going to hold you to that specifically, but take it within the next year or two.
I'm holding you to it, Mark.
Jamarl will hold you to it. Yeah. Why do you think that timing will happen? Briefly, Mark.
I think I should be held to it. Because if you look at the derivatives market, which is a way that investors vote with their pocketbooks as to what they think is going to happen in the future, it mimics the exact empirical variables that I measured back in 2005 through 2010. And what we have is we have a bubble built up in real estate. Derivative markets capitalize on that, and all the listeners really need to know about those markets is that a derivative engages in gearing, which just simply means that in good times, the profits are higher, but in bad times, the profits are lower. And you're going to have that same liquidity crisis in the housing market, I think, within a couple years that we had back in 2008. And then there's going to be calls for bailout. Well, we've already printed a lot of money. We've already issued more bonds. And right now in my consulting business, I'll tell you what's happening. The calls I get are almost exclusively now, Mark, how can we test how high we can raise our prices? I'm not exaggerating. I get 5 calls a day on this from people.
Is that not par for the course, though? We've got to close here pretty quickly, but...
Of course it is. Of course it is, but it is directly attributable to federal government policy, especially with respect to fiscal and...
Basically increasing inflation is what I'm hearing. In other words, they need to make more money. They have to charge more, and so they're kind of desperate. It's a little bit more ratcheted right now than it usually is. Is that right, Mark?
Yes, and what they want to know is, can I raise the price of a hamburger 10% and will demand for that hamburger only fall 3%.
Yeah, that kind of thing. And see, again, from the abatement perspective, you're working with them, sort of the supply-demand curve where they meet that kind of thing. Anyway, we got to close it. Mark Frost, as always, great conversation, always a great guest. He's an economist, recovering libertarian, Schumpeterian, and more. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be back in a minute with headlines and the last 2 hours of this morning show. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, precipitously perched at the edge of this resilient and exploited globe. Welcome to your context lens for the American perspective. In the left corner, I am your ever-vigilant, your indefatigable political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the independent corner, I am your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
That would strongly imply you are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Yeah, we're sitting here talking about what Mark was saying about the zoning and everything else. Look, government has a decidedly different job than private enterprise. That job is not to make profit, meaning if those boards, it's not their job. Now, if those boards are in the areas and everything else, and they're deciding, okay, we're going to increase our financial base on this, as opposed to doing the job of due diligence to the population, which is, hey, we need more starter homes, we need more homes for people who want to live and grow near bus lines, et cetera, et cetera. Meaning you're not constructing your society and your city based on how much revenue you can raise for your particular.
They are. That's the whole point. That's what we were literally just talking about.
No, but that's not their point.
No, but that is literally what we were just talking about. They're making decisions based on what's going to bring in more revenue for the city.
That's my point.
It's a city. It's not the company, but it applies to a city too. What should we do? Is every city just supposed to spend as much money as it wants to? Can they tax their citizens into the dirt? No. There are limits on these things. They're having to make economic decisions in the same way that businesses do. It's just that businesses are explicitly pursuing profit, and governments are supposed to balance these interests, but inevitably,
that's my point.
They pursue power. They pursue sustainable power, which is economic growth.
No, I'm making the point that their job, their philosophical job, is to do that stuff that was in, let's say, city building. And yeah, that's the point. A company rapidly pursues profit. Government's job is not to do that. It's not.
I think in this case, it's clear that it is, though.
It's not their job, Shane. There's a difference between their job versus what somebody is doing. Meaning, you could be paid to do, let's say, a radio job, and you could be, I don't know, half of the time in the bathroom or something. Who knows? Or smoking a cigarette or something. Like, it's like, okay, he's not really doing the job, even though he's supposed to be doing X, Y, Z. And I'm saying it's like, it's their job to be on the radio.
And I can say that a secretary who's supposed to get his boss who's supposed to get his boss coffee, he's supposed to go in there and help. If that secretary engages in, let's say, illicit activities almost entirely for their boss, you know what I mean. You know the kinds of sexual activities I'm talking about. That's what I'm talking about.
Honestly, I didn't know where you were going with that.
Exactly.
I was like, what?
If that's what they're doing for their boss all the time, then you know what their job actually is, despite what it says on the placard on their desk.
No, buddy. There's a difference between what you're supposed to be doing versus what you may end up doing. Even if it's informal and default. There's a difference between, this is your task versus this is what you do. And this is getting a little far afield. I'm just making the very basic point that the government's job, literally, is not just to make profit. It's to balance those concerns. And look, from the standpoint of the limits of what they do, it depends on what the society needs.
And the Department of Defense is only about defending America, right?
That's all it is.
That's all it is,
right?
Shane. Right?
Only about defense. Look, I get it. I've always made the argument to you that just because people say something don't mean they mean it. Oftentimes people say things that are duplicitous. But I'm saying from the standpoint of this is not somebody saying it's their job. It is literally in the bricks. Their job supposed to be dealing with public interest.
I hear you, but it's reality. De facto, that's their job, and that's my point. And I get what you're saying. That shouldn't be their job. Their job is supposed to be, and really, in some sense, is on a deeper level in this context.
I mean, that's what Mark is complaining. He's like, wait, they're not doing their jobs, et cetera, et cetera.
We all agree on that, kind of. But anyway.
All right, let's get to the headlines. In the news, the grim ledger. About 63,818 new COVID cases were reported in the United States yesterday, and there were about 362 new deaths. Over the past week, there's been an average of 45,343 cases per day, an increase of 180% from the average 2 weeks earlier. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated, and 56% of residents have received at least one dose. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 34,285,360 human beings across the United States and has killed 609,870 unfortunate Americans in this country. Well, they would have to be in this country if they were American. 31 children under the age of 12 tested positive for COVID-19 following an outbreak at a sleepaway camp in upstate New York. All of the children are too young to receive vaccines. All of the children are perfectly okay. By the same token, all of those children are also potential vectors for the virus. This week, 40% of all COVID-19 cases in the United States came from just 3 states. Florida, with 48% fully vaccinated, Missouri, with 40% vaccinated, Texas, with 43% fully vaccinated. The Alabama governor basically came out and said, I can't make you take care of yourself, but in very forceful statements of his, they're being called, is making the point of saying, go get vaccinated. And he's saying that because he's recognizing the number of people that are dying from the virus that are unvaccinated. At least 8 were shot in Chicago on Wednesday night just before midnight in the third mass shooting in 6 hours in the city. This comes on the same day as the Justice Department launched gun trafficking strike forces in 5 cities, including Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C., and San Francisco Bay Area. Meanwhile, D.C. and last night, there was a shooting in Logan Circle neighborhood on 14th Street in front of Mexico that left 2 wounded. And apparently this is in Shane's neighborhood.
Yes.
The gun strike forces don't work. You've been doing it for decades. You still have Chicago as Chicago. You still have people being shot near Shane location in Washington, D.C., near the White House. My point is that at a certain point, you need to look into deeper areas and deeper things that are creating the situation, as opposed to let's just throw in cops, because that's all that strike force is. Jeff Bezos gave $100 million each to Van Jones and the chef. Just the chef. Just the chef.
Like we were talking about earlier, it's a weird thing. There's no strings attached.
Yeah.
He says that he gave it to both of them because he saw these as noble people who were trying to bring society together in some way in a difficult time, that kind of thing.
And whatever people think of Van Jones, I think that's true of him. I don't know who the chef is. I don't know what the chef is.
Yeah.
But Van Jones,
Jose Andres, and I was having a little bit of a hard time figuring out exactly why he specifically was deserving of this, but
yeah,
there you go.
I think I'm deserving of $100 million to Jeff. I can do good things. I can come up with companies that spread joy and love across the world. Bezos. It honestly, at the point where you've done a skit where you're talking about a penis thing, he's not going to give $100 million.
Probably not, unless it was a particularly funny skit.
Yeah,
it's like, okay, buddy, you made me laugh with that.
Right. You made me laugh, but no. As part of Governor Abbott's effort to slow the number of border crossings, Texas has begun jailing illegal crossers on trespassing charges. An empty state prison in Daley, Texas, has been converted into a detention center for those people. So far, only 10 people have been detained, but the prison will be able to hold more than 950 individuals. Activision, the creator of Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, Crash Bandicoot, are being sued in California for sexual harassment and discrimination. Some of the frat boy, quote-unquote, frat boy environment included sexual harassment by executives, open jokes about rape, oh, that's gross, encourage, quote, inappropriate behavior, unquote, while drinking alcohol at the company's social gathering known as Cube Crawls. Women were also routinely paid less for the same work as their male counterparts. One woman committed suicide on a company trip after a sexual relationship with her colleague resulted in explicit photos of her being shared around the office. The opening ceremony for the Summer Olympics in Tokyo is taking place as we read this in a nearly empty stadium. Only a few hundred dignitaries and officials were allowed to attend the event, including American First Lady Jill Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron. And total attendees is supposed to be capped at 10,000, almost all of whom are locals being allowed to attend. From my understanding, as I was reading the news this morning, many of the athletes have not been vaccinated. Chinese President Xi Jinping has paid a historically significant and culturally sensitive trip to Tibet, the first time the leader of China has visited the region in nearly 30 years. The United States has launched a number of airstrikes against the Taliban in recent days, attacking near the southern province of Kandahar.
Exactly.
That makes zero sense.
Yeah, I was kind of going what to that too. We might want to talk about that for a minute.
The conflict in the Tigray region of Ethiopia is growing. The 8-month-long conflict is now spilled into the open or into the neighborhood of Afar. In this neighborhood region or neighboring region, at least 20 civilians have been killed and 54,000 have been displaced. Experts are warning of a growing need for humanitarian aid. DC has opened its first Amazon Fresh store. The superstore is equipped with, quote, just walk out technology, unquote, where the user will scan an app on their phone to enter and everything they exit will be automatically charged to their Amazon account. I've been talking about this for years. I love the fact that this has now come to DC. I've been talking about this for years. I love when I'm right. Major fast food chains in the United States are reaching out to applicants from years ago to try to combat worker shortages. Many people who applied to places like McDonald's, Cracker Barrel, and White Castle are digging through their trash, or like files, and giving these applicants another chance. Those are your headlines. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Hey, how about just pay them more? How about just pay them more? Your issue here and those people's issue and the meeting between those two things is more cash. But here's the catch. And here's the catch. And I love that these two stories were put together. Pure coincidence. DC has opened its Amazon Fresh store. You know who Amazon Fresh is not going to have to pay for? Somebody who stands there that gets $15 an hour. They're going to have technology that basically does that job. And whether you're talking about McDonald's, you can see it now in the McDonald's, especially when you're looking abroad. You go to the kiosk, you put in your order and what you want, and then you go and the person hands you your food. Well, how far away is that from, you don't even need a person to hand you your food. It just gives you your automatic order. Meaning, is it beyond the pale to construct a scenario or system that would allow a company like McDonald's or Burger King or fast food to construct something where it's automated entirely? I build software systems. I'm telling you, you'd be surprised what people can come up with in regards to systems. Meaning these two things are connected. The fast food and the people who are reaching out saying, I want $15 an hour. I want to get this benefit. I want this service. Those people deserve that as human beings. Yes. By the same token, the company is trying to lower their bottom line. And one of the bottom lines is cost of worker. And if they can say, all right, just like Amazon Fresh was able to do what they did, where you don't necessarily need the person there and everything else, we're going to do that. And so, no, we're not going to give you 15. We're going to put in technology that's going to be $14.90. And we're going to save money on that. And as the technology expands, we're going to get better and better and we'll make it cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And these people are going to lose their jobs. Now, this is kind of the intersection between, okay, we want more and higher wages because this is what we need for a living. And the company saying, we don't want to pay that because we need to maximize our profit. That's the intersection. Amazon Fresh is basically what these fast food chains are going to end up doing. Mark my words. I was right about the Amazon Fresh stuff. They have been talking about it for years. They were like, we're going to have a store. People walk in. They don't have to deal with a cashier, none of that stuff. And you walk out. Amazon has just done it and has opened it up in D.C. That stuff is going to fall behind it. Mark my words.
Fast food is going to have to, figure something out here. But do they deserve it? I don't know, man. I remember
deserve is different. Nobody deserves.
You said the word deserve, and I latched onto it. I was like,
deserve. What did I use it for?
Somebody deserving a job, a $15 an hour job.
Oh, I do think if a person works, they should be able to feed themselves. Yes.
Oh, I hear you on. Okay, that's what you're saying with that. I'm not sure. Yes, agreed on that one.
Fight me on people feeding themselves, Shane. Get it
no, I want you to work for me and I want you to starve.
I just mean the idea that a person works all day. My mom worked all day and wasn't making enough to just make a basic living, just a basic wage. Like that's like, I do believe that there should be somewhat of a basic wage that a person can live. Yeah, totally believe that. Because what's the alternative? The alternative is, well, there shouldn't be something where a person can live off. And that just seems a weirder position to me. Do we think human beings have value in our society? I think that, yes, that's an ideological position, but I accept that. That's an ideological position.
It is true.
And yeah, I defend that.
Can I pivot?
Go for it.
Two things. One, Afghanistan, Kandahar, the airstrikes and the Taliban.
Weird.
It is weird. And like I said earlier, I want to be brief with this because I want to get into Bezos for just a second. We're going to Scott next segment, by the way. Scott Ritter coming up.
We need to bring that up with him because that's very weird.
Bezos, Blue Origin, what are you thinking about?
The Peter's Craft? No, I meant the Kandahar shot.
Oh, yeah, yes, the Kandahar, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Why are we doing this? We're about to pull out.
Right.
It's like, about a month and a half away at this point, September
or August,
11th.
at the end of August, we're leaving. It was very clear.
Yes.
So why are you doing airstrikes when we're supposed to be leaving the country? And I mean, what is this defense of the Afghan government?
No, that's the
how
thing.
are you going to defend them once you leave?
That's the thing. Unless this serves some tactical purpose that benefits the Afghan government, and it may, and we'll talk to Scott. The assumption is we're just making a mistake because this is just going to rile them up. It's like striking a hornet's nest or whatever.
Yeah.
You're just going to make them angry. You might kill some people, but they're going to be there when we leave. We're leaving this as a problem for the Afghan government. That's
Right.
not. It doesn't seem productive, is my point.
No,
I
it doesn't
don't
seem
know why we
productive.
did it, but maybe there's something there.
Yeah, maybe Scott is like, hey, they did this because they're using some kind of tactical thing in order to stave off the inevitable, et
Yes.
cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, exactly.
It could be that. I mean, the Afghan government, I don't think has accepted the premise that it's going to collapse. I mean, from the standpoint that they're going by, at the very least for the overt optics of it all, the United States has worked with Afghanistan government for 20 years. We've propped them up. We're going to leave. And because we've done great things of freedom and democracy within the government, they're just going to stay after. I mean, I think the overt part of this is that these guys are going to persist.
You say optics. That's like the rose-tinted glasses version of optics. People, you got to be wearing something to see that. It's
Right.
true. That's not what's actually happening.
Yeah.
And I think anybody looking at it with plain eyes can see
Well, that's
that.
kind of my point, though. But
And you hope that the
does
Afghan
American
government-
public, is that the story that the American public was given? Meaning that this is falling apart, the government is going to collapse like Vietnam, et cetera. Like, I don't think that's the story that the government,
Well,
that the
it
public
kind of is. Everybody who's warning, it's just weird because it's Biden and because we don't know how to deal with these things as Americans in general. We have all these horrible memories of the Vietnam War, and we perceive that as a war that arguably couldn't have been won. Most people, I think, see it that way.
Yeah.
Or at least shouldn't have been fought. At the very least, that one. With Afghanistan, of course, people view it the same way. And yet, if you look in the Washington Post, the New York Times, you'll see columnists aplenty arguing that we should stay because we're betraying the government there. So people, I'm sure, are in the mix somewhere. They're, it's in between these two poles. But the Afghan government, are they wearing rose-tinted glasses?
Oh God, no.
You don't think so?
No.
Then
no.
shouldn't they?
They
Be
have
pissed,
to know.
Shouldn't they be pissed about this again, unless it serves a tactical purpose? Because
It might serve a tactical purpose. I mean, like, if you were the Afghan government, you're the president of the country, and you know America is leaving. Okay, what happens to you now that America leaves? Well, you already know, okay, we're going to be under pressure from the Taliban. We're going to have to try to retain some level of stability. But at the end of the day, what are your options here? Are you just going to pack up and leave, which is an option? And if you're not going to pack up and leave, then what? Then it becomes, okay, well, we need to stay and we need all the assistance that we can get, hence airstrikes or whatever else. Now, does it push back the inevitable? Probably not. But from the standpoint of pushing back, I'm telling you, like when we're playing chess. So I was playing this guy one day, and the guy he was losing. He was about to lose. I think it was like maiden 3 or something like that. He moves. I'm like, dude, why are you doing that? You're supposed to move this way. This is the best move. He's like, what does it matter? Well, that's the best move. Like, that's your final fight. It's like everything that you can do to stave off the inevitable. It could be that. I mean, it could be something that
but he would lose, right? Anyway,
he's still going to lose, but it's kind of besides the point. It's staving off the inevitable just for as far to the degree that you can. It's like you're holding back the night with the hopes that there's something. Because any opportunity that you're going to get has to take place after you hold back the night for that particular
if it's
thing.
existential, then you lose nothing.
Yes, exactly. And so it's that on some level. Unless the Afghan government is going to say, okay, fair enough, we leave. And if they're never going to do that, then anything that they can do in order to push back the inevitable is just part of the course.
Yeah.
I mean, but I don't know. It's the logic of it in my head, of it, in the way stuff like that works. You would do that because you have to do that. Existential.
Let's go to a break.
Let's go to a
And
break.
on the logic of competition, military escalation, talking about Afghanistan, talking about our current military engagements, ones we're leaving, and ones we may be getting into, current and next-gen military doctrine and hardware. We're going to be joined by Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and WMD whistleblower. We'll be back with him for a full half-hour conversation. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of this short break.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
Deshaun, what do you want to talk about today?
Well, Bob, that's easy. I want to talk about the need to stop the development of self-driving cars.
Again, Sean, you're driving me nuts. I think the self-driving car thing's already out of the gate.
No. It's never too late. See, now the leading experts in the field, I mean, just pick one, whichever one, leading experts have repeatedly warned us about the dangers of artificial intelligence. Look, I'm telling you, man, we have to stop the robots by any means necessary.
I see what you did there.
Yep.
Tune into our show by any means necessary daily from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Time on Radio Sputnik. And don't forget to call in at 3:20 p.m. to our studio number 202-521-1320.
And if you miss us live, check us out on SputnikNews.com, Spreaker, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts to stay up to date on the latest political, social, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our stations in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps make this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. As Shane and I were discussing in the previous segment, the United States has done airstrikes in Kandahar. Just read the story. The U.S. military launched several airstrikes this week in support of Afghan government forces fighting Taliban insurgents, including in the strategically important province of Kandahar, officials say. The strikes demonstrate U.S. intention to continue to support Afghan forces with combat aircraft based outside the country at least until the scheduled conclusion of the U.S. military withdrawal on August 31st. Shane and I wondered aloud, why are they doing this? If they're leaving on August 31st or September, whenever their final date of departure is, why are they doing this? How is this really going to help the Afghan government if indeed the United States government is leaving the country? Is the country indeed going to fall? And if the country is going to fall, as Shane says, isn't this just kicking a hornet's nest? By my estimation, it's them pushing back the night. Even if they believe it's going to fall, you almost have no other scenario but to hold back the night and wait for and look for every opportunity that you can get your hands on. To have a conversation about what is taking place right now in Afghanistan, this kind of strange militaristic engagements. We're joined with Scott Ritter. Scott Ritter is a former UN weapons inspector and weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. You can follow Scott on Twitter at @RealScottRitter. Scott, thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
What is going on in Afghanistan? And is my assessment of it right? That even if the government is going to fall, even if the government knows it's going to fall, even if everybody knows that the United States is leaving, your job at that point is to try to hold back the night, to try to hold back the Taliban for as long as you can potentially hold back the Taliban, either for some kind of deal or for some level of existence outside of the United States being there. What are your thoughts on this? Is that appraisal correct, first and foremost? But on top of that, how do you frame the situation of what's taking place right now in Afghanistan?
First of all, the United States is leaving. We know that, and U.S. military forces are being rapidly withdrawn. Whatever residual force will remain will be in Kabul only to protect the embassy. I think there was a political calculation made when the decision was made to rapidly withdraw U.S. forces, that the Afghan government and the 400,000 Afghan security forces that we've spent billions training would be far more resilient than they've proven to be.
But they thought that about the Iraqis also. Like during the time with the Iraqi army, where this is within the time of my political awareness. And I distinctly remember articles like, oh, the Iraqis, we've given them so much, all of these years. They need to just kind of, grow up and be ready to fight on their own. And it's like, are you serious? You destroyed that country, kill 1 million people, and now are saying, okay, they need to kind of pull themselves up by their bootstraps. But we had the same thought when the ISIS became an issue, and we was like, okay, we dumped trillions of dollars into the Iraqi security forces. They should be able to defend the country. Oh, wait, they can't. Why are we shocked? I guess I don't get it. It just seems like the sideshow Bob stuff where we're hitting our head on the same rake. I mean, am I wrong? Tell me if I'm wrong.
You're not wrong, but there's different gradients of being right. And what I mean by that is the military forces, whether it's Iraqi or Afghan, have a certain capacity to fight. It's a proven capacity to fight. That capacity increases when you have American military advisors working with them, when you have American military units operating with them, taking the lead, when you have American intelligence driving the provision of close air support and fire support. As you decrease the American involvement, the combat capacity of these units decreases, but there is a judgment as to to what level. Do they go from 70% effective to 50% effective? Do they go from 70 to 0? What is the gradient there? And I believe the people responsible for planning the American military withdrawal from Afghanistan did not see the combat capacity of the Afghan security forces plummeting to the degree that they have. Believe that there would be a residual combat capability sufficient to provide security for the American withdrawal. Look, we know Afghans are going to fall. The reason why we're getting out of Afghanistan the way we are, we're quitting. This isn't just simply saying mission accomplished, we won, we're handing the keys over to the new owners. We are quitting. We are quitting because we lost. We are quitting because we have done the calculus that says the Afghan government is so corrupt, so disengaged with the Afghan people, and the Taliban are so dominant that the die is cast. It's over. We're not going to waste any more money trying to prop up this corrupt regime, these forces that cannot fight to win against a populist uprising. That's what the Taliban is. I'm not saying they're wonderful. I'm not saying they're great, but they have more in common with the Afghan people than the Afghan government does. And if Mao Zedong taught us anything about fish swimming in the ocean, that's how you win. Especially in a battle for the hearts and minds of the Afghan people, which had been waged for 20 years. So we're quitting Afghanistan. We just thought that the team that we're leaving would hold on a little bit more. They're not. And so what you're seeing with the airstrikes in Kandahar is the United States attempting to stiffen up Afghan resolve. If you have the promise, the potential of American fire support, maybe they won't surrender. Maybe they won't quit. Maybe they won't retreat. Maybe they'll fight a little bit longer, or at least long enough for us to get the hell out of that country. That's what's going on there. It's not an airstrike to win. First of all, it's pathetic. People think, oh, an airstrike. Man, that's going to turn the tide. We used to have the entire Air Force there. We had B-52s circling over that country on a daily basis. We had A-10s based in that country bombing. We had Marine aircraft, Air Force aircraft, Army helicopters. We flooded that area with military aircraft. They were conducting hundreds, if not thousands, of airstrikes a day, and we still couldn't win. So anybody who thinks that a pinprick of an airstrike in Kandahar is going to tilt the military balance in favor of the Afghan government is smoking some serious Afghan opium. It's just not going to happen. It's a political move. It's psychological warfare 101. It's designed to give the Afghan troops who continue to fight hope. They aren't going to turn into those 22 U.S. trained commandos who got surrounded in northern Afghanistan, surrendered, and were gunned down. They don't want that to happen to them. And the longer they resist, the more likely that outcome is going to be. So if we want them to continue to resist, we have to give them hope that somehow the magic airplane is going to appear overhead and drop the magic bomb that's going to magically make the Taliban go away. That may happen one time in Kandahar, but it's not going to happen again on a regular basis.
Scott, is this a success for the State Department in any way? Is the entire war in Afghanistan, can this be read on a deeper level as, okay, they get enough utility out of this to call this success on some grounds and some important grounds, or is this just a complete failure, in your opinion, where the military-industrial complex profited, the Pentagon kept some operational capacity, they got some experience on the ground, that kind of thing, they kept, doing their jobs for the time being, but the State Department, how do you think they either profited or suffered from this, Scott?
It's a disaster across the board. First of all, the Pentagon didn't get any experience out of this unless the experience you want to get out of it is losing. We lost in Afghanistan. We didn't win. We didn't accomplish a single military objective. Don't play tactics with me. I mean, I played this game before. We never lost a tactical battle. War ain't about tactical battles. War is about strategic objectives, and we didn't achieve a single strategic objective ever.
Well, Scott, the main one was supposed to be to prevent another launch of a 9/11 style attack on the United States. So I guess the question is, was that
attack?
And here's where I would go.
Yeah.
Another objective is obviously just a platform and some control in the Middle East. We may have lost that control, we're going to be losing it as we withdraw. But what we've left is an absolute quagmire for our main geopolitical foes, Russia and China, which seems like a useful trap for us to have left in place. And I'm not saying that's intentional or anything like that, but you could chalk that up. Would you see that as, in its own way?
Didn't leave a trap.
Yeah, go for it, Scott.
You didn't leave a trap. The only trap was the one we stepped into. Our geopolitical foes are all emerging from this stronger than ever before. First of all, they're emerging to a situation where the United States is no longer a player. That's a victory for everybody in that region.
Well, I think what Shane is talking about is that Russia, China, and Iran have dubious ties with the Taliban. That's the point. Like, they consider them a terrorist organization, just like the U.S. does.
And this is going to be a volatile state. Granted, we have also overextended ourselves, spent tremendous resources, and wasted countless lives and decades fighting this thing. And I would say it's a net loss. But yeah, I was throwing that into the pot too, Scott.
I just think that for whether you're Russia, China, or Iran, first of all, there's no such thing as a dubious tie with the Taliban. The Taliban is a reality. You don't have dubious ties with reality unless you want to base your entire foreign policy, national security policy on, an unreal expectations.
No, I mean, but you can have frigid relationships with somebody. It's like saying the United States, the ties with Russia, how would they describe the ties with Russia or China or anywhere else? They just have relationships with them that are, yes, the Taliban is reality. By the same token, it doesn't mean that you're working well with them. There can be conflicts.
I don't think anybody works well with the Taliban. The Taliban doesn't even work with itself.
Fair enough.
That's kind of where I was going. That's kind of what I was thinking. And again, I wouldn't say this is a net profit for the U.S. by any means in any metric there. Again, military-industrial complex arguably benefits just because whenever we spend money on any war, they benefit. But that's a sort of constant, I would argue. In terms of the conversation we originally brought you on to have, current and next generation military hardware.
Oh, wait, I wanted to answer one question. Whether or not it's still a launching pad, meaning the one key objective that they said in going into Afghanistan, we are preventing Afghanistan from being a launching pad from another 9/11 style attack on the United States. That's what they kept saying over and over again. Is that objective accomplished? Meaning with the Taliban taking over, would that still accomplish that objective?
The launching pad for 9/11 was Hamburg, Germany. So if you're going to try and stop the processes that created 9/11 and ignoring what was going on in Hamburg, Germany, and putting all your effort on focusing on what was going on in Afghanistan, you're fighting the wrong battle. No. Moreover, Al-Qaeda still is there. Al-Qaeda is still in the framework of Afghanistan. We have empowered regional Islamic movements. ISIS is in Afghanistan now. The Uyghur independence movement is, viable inside Afghanistan, receiving combat training, weapons, etc., to threaten China. We've empowered Uzbek independence movements to threaten Uzbekistan. We've empowered Tajik independence movements to threaten Tajikistan. So, no, we didn't accomplish anything. We actually made it worse. I'm not saying that something that's going to happen in Afghanistan is going to hit the United States. That never happened. What hit the United States came out of Hamburg, Germany. The planning was done in Hamburg. The people were recruited in Hamburg. They received their money out of Hamburg. I mean, that's where it happened. Afghanistan, that's where Osama bin Laden and a bunch of other guys were hanging out, providing spiritual guidance. Spiritual guidance can come from any location in the world. So invading and occupying Afghanistan in order to prevent a 9/11 type attack was a fake mission to begin with. It didn't work. And just to comment on the military, sure, these defense companies made money building things that are irrelevant, made money propping up a system of warfare that is no longer viable. It's like they overdosed on incompetence and irrelevance. And now we have a situation where the United States has to shift gears, and you're going to find that many of these defense companies aren't capable of shifting fast enough, and they're not going to get the contracts. The contracts are going to go to other companies. Now, if you want to look at it as the defense complex as a whole making money, yes, they make money, but there are definitely going to be losers in the defense industry because of the commitment they made to counterinsurgency warfare in Afghanistan.
Those specific tactics, that kind of fourth generation warfare thing, the gear that we're in now. Can you describe what that gear is like? What the current doctrine and hardware supports, and what we're moving into, Scott?
Well, what I can say is that before 9/11, back in my day, we were the premier combat force in the world. We could do it all. We could do counterinsurgency. We could do medium intensity conflict, and we could do large scale combined arms warfare. We had the finest military in the world. We spent a lot of money making it the finest military in the world, but we're also focused. To create a military that's capable of standing up to a peer level force, such as a China or a Russia, requires specific kind of organization, specific kind of equipment, and most importantly, a specific kind of training. The training is the most important element of that, because you've got to bring together all the components of warfare, from intelligence to logistics to fire support to maneuver. You got to bring in aircraft and helicopters and ground troops, and they all have to work together in synergy in order for this to succeed. Perhaps the greatest example of how it works when it all comes together is what the United States military did in the Gulf War, where we went up against a very large, very capable Iraqi military. A lot of people are like, oh, it was the Iraqi military. They weren't very good. Ask the Iranians about that. That Iraqi military in the final years of the Iraq War kicked their butts. They were very good. They were combat hardened. They were well led, but they didn't stand a chance against the United States military that had been spending the last several decades preparing to fight the Soviets in the plains of Europe. We don't have that capability anymore, not even close. We can't generate that kind of power. We don't do that kind of training. We're not equipped to do that. And so people are saying we need to get back to that level, and I would say probably not, because we can't afford it. We simply can't afford to have the military that we had back in the 1980s and 1990s. We can't fight a land war, a ground war in Asia and win. We can't fight a ground war in Europe and win. So we're going to have to be gearing ourselves to a new kind of warfare that takes advantage of our isolation from the Pacific, the landmass in the Pacific, our isolation from Europe, to exploit our advantages in the sea, to exploit our advantages in the air, to exploit our advantages in terms of precision long-range strike weapons, to build a military that is very flexible so that we can serve capacity to limited areas to gain advantages and then get out of there, not get dragged down in a fight. It's a new way of thinking. It's a new way of warfare. There's only one branch that's doing this right now, and that's the Marine Corps. The Commandant of the Marine Corps has come under a lot of fire because he said, we don't need tanks. He got rid of all the tanks. That's a big deal. We don't need military police. That's an Army function. He got rid of them. We're going to reduce our conventional infantry battalions. He got rid of 3 of them. In the Marine Corps, we don't have that many of them to begin with. All of them are storied units that could trace their lineage back to World War I, Yellow Wood, World War II, Iwo Jima, Vietnam, The Walking Dead. They're gone. And
this is real interesting because oftentimes, a war doesn't, or what people think a war is going to be like, it's often not like that way. And it takes this kind of reorganization in regards to how people are going to fight that conflict moving forward. And so it's like this thinking ahead of, okay, what is the future war going to look like, and what is the military posture needs to be in order to accommodate that future war? I think that's what we're kind of getting into now. What is our posture looking at the world? Is it what you just mentioned, that basically, okay, this is going to be a sea engagement, but how do you win a war like that? I mean, meaning at some point, there's always a situation of toppling the capital or whatever, or however you want to call it. How do you win a war in a situation where you don't necessarily have tanks or you're undermining the land forces?
Well, we were never going to win a war against China by taking Beijing. So let's just take that right off the map.
Yeah.
You know, and if we're defining victories as occupying the enemy's capital, we will never win a war against China.
I think Napoleon was supposed to have won that when he invaded Russia back in the early 19th century, but he didn't.
Well, I guess my point, though, is if we are talking about wars where we're talking about long-range weaponry and everything else, we're talking about just basically total war where we're basically obliterating the other person's cities and capitals and everything else. I guess my point is there's no way to win that.
Well, first of all, it's not necessarily true. Again, I'll take us back to the Gulf War where, and I was heavily involved in the planning for that and the execution of that. And I was in Schwarzkopf's staff, so I saw, virtually the A to Z of how this war unfolded. We struck targets that were specifically identified to achieve a specific objective to shut down specific capacity. We didn't have to blow up the totality of Baghdad's power generation capability. We only needed to hit a few places. Then we disrupt their ability to repair, and now they don't have electricity.
No, Scott, the difference between those things is Baghdad is not a China or Russia or pure nation. That's the difference. It's like meaning this is not us just picking targets and just hitting those targets. The board doesn't hit back in that situation.
I would tell you right now that Baghdad was heavily defended, more heavily defended than any target we may hit in a future conflict. So again, the people have a misperception that somehow the Gulf War was a cakewalk. It was not. We made it look easy because we were that good. But it took a lot of planning, and it took a lot of precision execution. And that's what we will have to bring to the table against a China or a Russia. And again, China doesn't mean to take down China, you don't have to bomb China. That may, in fact, be counterproductive. To take down China, you have to choke it off from its resources. China right now is using bridge and roads, the initiative. They're going out and extending their economic reach to the world. Africa is becoming a big player in the Chinese economy. You shut down China's access to Africa. You shut down China's access to the Middle East. You shut down China's access to Central Asia. You choke off the Chinese economy, you win the war.
But how would we, and I'm not saying that this is a good thing to do, how would we pursue that using the way of operating that you described, where you basically are operating defensively, you're using the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans to guard us, as we historically have, of course, and then when you do decide to intervene, it's with small strike forces like the SWAT team of the military, just to get the idea across very simply. But, right now there's a coup in Myanmar, still ongoing, February 1st of this year. It has to do with a country that would serve as a primary conduit for the Belt and Road Initiative, like you're talking about. When we've been covering the story, we've been talking about that. We're taking that as an example, but you could apply it to other regions in Asia or to regions in Africa or the Middle East. I don't see how we would be able to get involved using that kind of strike force and disrupt their ability to do the Belt and Road Initiative without an occupation following an invasion and, without the military police that you're talking about. Now, I don't think we should do that. Do you? Is that kind of, and if so, how do you see that working? I hope this makes sense, Scott.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, first of all, if I were in charge, I'd be working towards peaceful coexistence with China rather than preparing for war.
Totally. Agreed 100%.
Yes, you tell your military the military has to be able to put something on the table. I mean, that's their job. When I was there, we planned for everything because you didn't know when the phone was going to ring and the president would say, we have a crisis X and we need you to do Y. And we can't sit there and go, I've never heard of X and I don't know what Y is yet. Yep, we got a plan for that. We've trained for that. We're prepared for that. This is the force structure that would be necessary. This is what would have to happen, da-da-da. And the president can either say, good to go, or no, we need to modify that. And then you have to be prepared for the modifications. That's what a professional military force does. So I have no problem with our military preparing for any contingency. Because that's what its job is. But I would prefer our State Department to be taking the lead to ensure that we never had to execute those contingencies. So right off the bat, my priority would be not to fight a war. But if you are going to fight a war, I do think you can start with rethinking what victory looks like. And the first thing is to reimagine victory that doesn't involve American boots on the ground. doesn't involve an American occupying force, that doesn't involve America toppling the government and then seeking to replace it with a new government, nation building. We're not very good at that. We've proven that over the years. So I would just take that right off the bat. We can destabilize Myanmar, but we're not going to put in a democracy in Myanmar. We can destabilize a place. We're not going to put in a democracy. Is this the ideal? No, but our goal isn't to push democracy around the world. Our goal is to defeat China, or our goal is to defeat Russia. And I think we just have to change the notion of what victory is, what victory looks like. In the past, we've said we're the good guys, we're the forces of democracy. Victory must look like us. At the end of the day, when we intervene, what we leave behind must look like us. I'm saying no. You can't win that kind of war. We've proven that. We've lost everyone we tried to fight. So victory has to be not about achieving a just and righteous outcome for the people of another country. Victory has to be about defeating an enemy.
Because that kind of victory is impossible, to be clear from what you just said.
The first kind.
Scott, I want you to put on the hat from another country for a moment. We were just talking about the Russian missile systems and everything else. They had a air show or a weapons show. And all of these weapons were basically being on display and everything else, everything from AI technology, AI swarm technology, hypersonic weapons, et cetera, et cetera. From the standpoint of other countries, looking forward, how do they think of themselves in regards to their militaristic needs and protection going forward? Meaning if the U.S. is looking for a military policy where it's saying, okay, we're going to fight these wars at somewhat of a distance. We don't necessarily need to put it in boots because these things are going to be done with these kind of long-range weapons, or strike forces because we don't want these large-scale wars. If that is our tenor going forward, what is the perspective of other nations as they deal with that? Because I would imagine in the same way that our military has their military doctrine, what is the military doctrine of somewhere, let's say like Russia, or for that matter, somewhere like China, that knows about the choke points and knows about some of these war plans?
Well, I would say that the concepts that I outlined to you about rethinking warfare, they've already done. There's no one in China that thinks they can stand toe-to-toe with the United States and slug it out and win.
Right.
I mean, yes, if we're stupid enough to invade China proper and try and occupy Beijing, then we've sort of done Napoleon goes to Russia and we're going to get what we deserve. There's no one in Russia that thinks it's a good idea to stand toe-to-toe with the United States in Europe because the price they will pay will be horrific. They have looked at the United States. They have looked at how we operate around the world, and they know where our choke points are, where our weak points are, and they have developed military capacity, to defend themselves from American aggression, to make the cost of a stand-up fight too high for the United States to consider. But that's a defensive combat. They're not in that game to win, to occupy. Their offensive capability is about making it impossible for the United States to function globally. And that's one of the things we have to learn to overcome. This is why the Commandant of the Marine Corps said the day of putting a Marine division on amphibious ships and sailing it to a foreign coast to invade like we did at Iwo Jima is over. Never going to happen again, because those ships won't get out of the harbor. And if they do, they get sunk halfway. And if they don't, they'll be sunk as they approach the coast. It's a new way of thinking. We can't fight the way we used to because the enemy has taken a look at us and they recognize what made us work in the past, and they've developed capacity that can counter that. So they've already done it. They flipped the switch. They're fighting a kind of war that we're not prepared to fight. We have to learn to be prepared to fight that kind of war. The day of classic World War II massive land battles is over. Too expensive, too deadly. The day of strangling a nation through strategic strikes of opportunity that target specific capacities, that's the direction we're heading.
Scott, when people are young, often you're a young man, you might have a brother, you're young, you wrestle with each other, you'll fight, and sometimes push comes to shove, things get bloody. If you return to that activity with the same force 20 years later or 30 years later, you might kill each other. In the same way, the kind of wars that we're used to fighting, if we return to them with a lack of experience, with many decades out of active experience, using modern military hardware, how likely do you think it is that we kill each other as nations?
Well, first of all, I don't think, and this is something I tell everybody in the and professionals understand this. I don't think we can sustain modern full-scale warfare. I'll give you an example. We put a heavy brigade into Europe to deter the Russians in Poland and Lithuania. God forbid the Russians come across the border. That brigade won't last 5 days. It'll be gone, eliminated, terminated, cease to exist. 5,000 Americans dead, wounded, or captured. All of their equipment destroyed. And we don't have another brigade ready to fill the gap. That's how we lose. Now, those 5,000 men and women would have fought bravely. They would have fought valiantly. They may have killed 15,000 of their Russian counterparts. But in the end, they're all dead, and we've got nothing to replace them. We only have 400,000 troops in the military to begin with, and not all of those are combat troops. In a modern fight, in World War II, we used to chew up 400,000 people in a month. The Russians would chew them up in a week. But then they had 12 million people to draw on to replace them. We can't do that today. We will burn ourselves out. We are incapable because weapons today are so deadly. So deadly. They're accurate. The amount of firepower that can be brought to bear is so tremendous that survivability is going to be measured in minutes.
That's what freaks me out. And we've got to go into a break, and we're going to have to close out the conversation with you, but it's the intensity, the scale, and the speed. We were talking about hypersonic weapons, and this whole conversation, by the way, was kind of triggered by the Max Air Show, which we were talking about earlier this week, where Russia is debuting new military hardware, both to be used on their end and also to be sold ostensibly. And the focus on defense against hypersonic weapons, the speed, the way that can accelerate, and obviously, if it accelerates very quickly and it's very, very deadly, it just gets bad and I don't think we have, it gets bad so quickly, and I don't think we have any real frame of reference for that. We're so out of the loop that I wanted to hear your take on that. Anyway, Scott, great conversation. Thank you for joining us. Very informative. Really appreciate it. Scott Ritter.
Thanks for having me.
And for those listening, that was Scott Ritter, former UN weapons inspector and a weapons of mass destruction whistleblower. Follow Scott on Twitter at @RealScottRitter. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, coming back on the other side of this short break. Be right back.
Fault Lines.
Want to know how international issues fit into local ones and how local issues fit into international ones? With the historical context to tie them together, we're bringing it to you all by any means necessary. Tune in weekdays from 2 to 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time to hear me, Jackie Lukman, alongside my co-host Sean Blackman. By any means necessary, your guide to connecting the social, political, and economic movements shaping the world around us.
Fault Lines.
And we're back with an approximately 7-minute long call-in segment. We're going to be talking about the Olympics, which are ongoing. But right now, it's like just the opening ceremony. They're waltzing through. I'm seeing people comment on it. It's not on the TV in that room, sadly.
I thought it was on. Okay.
Stadium's basically empty. And the athletes are walking around like waving at the empty stadium like they're used to doing as if it were full. You know what I mean? It's just, it's kind of awkward.
Like, who are they waving to?
And sad. And I'm not trying to be critical because it would be really cool if I want to go back home and watch these. I'm going to, rewind and watch some of this stuff. I kind of like the Olympics. I'll put it like this, Jamarl. It is a grand international parade of human potential that I think can really bring people together and lighten the mood in some dark moments.
Oh, love it.
And
I love it. Love the competition.
Mid-pandemic, the city in which it's being held is in a state of emergency right now. My point is, I just hope it goes well because that could be good. It could be good for the world. You know what I mean?
I just hope those people don't get infected with something.
Yes.
And you have just pandemic spread by athletes going around the world. That type of stuff. This kind of weird stuff. I hope that's not the case. It is kind of weird. I'm walking through and waving to an empty room, I suppose. Tradition on some part. And I guess maybe you can look at it and say, well, people in television, they're watching, et cetera, et cetera. It's a little weird. But personally, I like the competition, even though I don't watch it. I like this notion of the world coming together for something other than, hey, I'm going to punch you in the nose or I'm going to take your dollar. I like this notion that, all right, we're going to bring up the best of our ours versus the best of yours, and let's just see who's the best at the world. And you walk out with the trophy saying, I am the greatest person alive. And then the country says, our country is the greatest thing. I love that. I love that. I mean, the Russian thing called a checkmate. And I'm sitting, every time I hear it, I'm like, oh, that's so cool. Because I think back to like the Queen's Gambit, like, you know, that heyday of chess back in the 60s and everything else is like we're Moscow, and it's like these guys, they did chess like a science. And it's like they came in suits and formal suits and playing because they were so, you know, their brain power was such that, like that stuff where it's like, I love this notion of this world competition or competing at a particular thing.
Or people
do it with soccer.
People aren't dying.
Right, where people aren't dying.
It's human excellence that's being improved upon.
Human excellence.
It's not human lives being wasted.
No less.
Yeah.
I am great at the stupid human trick.
Because you canalize the desire for competition and the need to prove yourself and to beat out the enemy and to be impressive and to dominate in all these ways.
Yeah.
But you do it without anybody dying. And ideally, people just like get more physically fit and, you know,
they get better at whatever that particular thing is. And so like, because I think chess has all sorts of positive downstream effects. Massively so. Oh, good. 2 callers. Okay, yeah. And so I love this I love it. I love it. So for me, the Olympics thing, yeah, that's great. That's awesome. The world coming together, competition.
All right.
Let's go to callers.
We have Tarif calling in from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
I need to set me up with y'all producer because Jeremy Curry had
I saw your text last night, Tarif. I'm sorry I did not respond to you, but yeah, Jemima Pierre, the one that you'd mentioned to us before, who has been a guest on By Any Means Necessary. Thank you so much, Tarif. Tarif, for everybody listening, I'm sorry for interrupting Tarif, but just to explain it to the audience, Jemima Pierre, activist in person, I believe a historian or something like this, over on By Any Means Necessary, you recommended to us. Then you contacted her, and she said she's down to come on the show.
Excellent.
She said she's down to come on the show. We just need to set her up. Tarif, public props to you. Thank you for your help with that.
Hey, that's what I'm here for, you know, to help all people help each other out. But, you know, okay, here we go. The Senate passed a vote to make women register for the draft now. And the pro-Israeli paper, the Jewish Chronicle in Britain, was charged with smearing pro-Palestinian Labor Party members, which some of them had to leave in 2018 when Jeremy Corbyn was being attacked, called anti-Semite. But this guy named Mark Waywood, he run his case against them like yesterday or day before last, and there's a settlement, and they had to retract it by putting it in a newspaper, the Jewish Chronicle, and they had to apologize in front of everybody in the court. So that's a good thing. I have to give it to the Jewish Chronicle that they stood up and they apologized and said they were sorry, and now the man, Mark Wayward, can get his just due. Get justice now. That's good. That's all I have to say. Free Julian Assange.
Oh, you almost missed that one. You almost missed the Julian Assange thing today, Tarif. Tarif, thanks, man. I appreciate it. All right, let's go to Kevin from New York. Kevin, what's going on?
You got about a minute and a half, Kevin.
Yeah, I'll be very quick. I just thought your last discussion with Scott Ritter was interesting. However, you all seem to be caught up in the means of warfare as opposed to the reason for that. The need of conventional weapons is not, as Scott described, the kind of war we might be fighting. But why do nations go to war? It's usually because they seek to take resources from another nation. And that seemed to be the historical reasons why it's always occurred. Thus, the proxy war and more covert or actions that have been conducted since the beginning of time, at least here in the United States, will seem to be more the play that will be engaging in. But again, what about mutual cooperation? And I just think,
look, I love the idea of mutual cooperation. And when you get into this notion of putting weapons in space, and it says, okay, let's make agreements and not put weapons in space. Okay, well, if you can make that agreement, well, what about here on Earth? And why don't you make those agreements here? Look, I agree with you. Competition among nations. And when one nation believes it can be competitive and get an advantage, well, that nation tends to try to get it. Nations tend to try to protect themselves, all sorts of things. So yes, we get that. But the context of the conversation had everything to do with the weapons show that had taken place in Russia. And if these guys are printing out weapons like this, yes, some of these weapons are going to be for sale, but also what is the context of these weapons being used for in regards to home protection and the lethality of those weapons? And what does it mean in the context of military doctrine? That was the focal point. It wasn't so much that we were ignoring one, we were just focusing on the other. Shane?
Okay, I'm going to leave this for the short time we have there, but I will definitely call back because I happen to think that it still seems to have displayed more concern and pleasure, I won't say pleasure, take in the whole means of the warfare as opposed to why we go to warfare.
Well, Kevin, thank you for the call. I believe you're a first-time caller, so really appreciate you calling in. And please do call back in. We talked, that was not the purpose of the conversation with Scott, and it could have been, but we were planning on talking about doctrine and hardware, those two words specifically, those ideas. What's our strategy? What's the dominant strategy for this century, arguably, but at least this generation? Also the hardware, the tech, because we were talking about the Max Air Show, although Scott did talk about this when he talked about victory and what kind of victory we're looking for. But I just want to say, I agree completely. And I think that, focusing on trade and sort of, mutual productivity, the division of labor, all of the lessons of economics that ideally, together as a global community, we could learn from working together to build new things. That'd be cool too. But sadly, we're riddled with war. And like Jamarl said, we're just stuck in it. Anyway, we got to go into a break. We'll be back in a minute with headlines and the last hour of this morning show. You're listening to Fault Lines. Be right back.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
And we're back live, coming to you from across the divided states of America, the most disruptive show across those disunited states, covering news, politics, and events. In the Independent Corner, I'm your political analyst, Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever-vigilant, the last man on the wall, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And together, we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're getting directly into the headlines. In COVID news, there were about 63,818 new COVID cases reported in the United States yesterday. There were also about 362 new deaths. Over the past week, we've had an average of about 45,343 cases per day. That's an increase of 180%, almost 3 times from the average number of new cases 2 weeks earlier. 49% of the total American public has been fully vaccinated at this point, and 56% of residents have received at least 1 dose of a COVID vaccine. As of this morning, the coronavirus has infected about 34,285,000 people across the United States and killed almost 610,000 of us, 609,870 people, just in the U.S. alone. 31 children under the age of 12 tested positive for COVID-19 following an outbreak at a sleepaway camp in upstate New York. All of the children are too young to receive vaccines, but of course, the fact that they're all congregated together, that would lead to them being infected. Worries about the Delta variant, and the fact that, again, these kids weren't vaccinated. A lot of people are pushing for kids to be able to be vaccinated, that whole conversation. And kids returning to schools. A lot of stuff that makes this article and this story interesting, even though objectively it's 32 people getting sick with COVID when tens of thousands of people get sick with it on a daily basis.
Yeah, it's not a huge amount. I think the reason the story is interesting is only because, there's been this argument about, kids don't need to be vaccinated because they often don't get sick. Well, these kids got sick. And it's like, but it's only 31.
They tested positive.
They tested yeah, good distinction. They tested positive, meaning that even though they themselves didn't get direly ill or anything else.
I don't know the specifics. I'm just saying that I didn't.
No, well, in the story it said they didn't get ill, they didn't get physically ill, like dying or anything like that. They were just infected with the illness. I'm saying they're vectors. Whether they get sick or not, they're vectors. They could get kids can get sick. That's the point. That's the reason I put down the story. Whether it's 31, and that can go through a school with these kids being close together. That can go through day camps or whatever, or with these kids out there in the woods somewhere where they're puttering about at this thing. I guess my thing is be aware. Be aware. Kids are not immune from that stuff.
Well, and there's a conversation about, are kids as likely to spread it? I don't know.
No.
But there's an interesting thing here, and probably no, but there's an interesting thing here where think about the people who are saying kids don't spread COVID. What are they doing? They're relying on specific scientists saying that in defiance of common sense and personal experience.
Right.
If you have kids in school, they get you sick a lot.
Yes.
They catch the cold, they catch the flu, they bring it home, they get you sick all the time. So going into this, what's your expectation going to be? If a kid catches COVID, if they have it in their body,
they're going to spread it.
It might spread it to you, maybe. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That's sort of par for the course. And it's weird that so many people have I don't know, fallen in the opposite
into
direction.
that, yeah.
But maybe they have facts that I don't, and I'm missing something to try to be objective about it. I just doubt it. This week, 40% of all new COVID-19 cases in the U.S. came from just 3 states: Florida with 48% fully vaccinated, Missouri with 40%, and Texas with 43% fully vaxxed. So those are all below the national average, and Florida particularly stands out because Governor Ron DeSantis, Republican of Florida, had been leading and getting a lot of praise for the fact that Florida hadn't had all these cases. You know, light lockdowns across the state, no lockdowns in some ways. Receiving praise. Remember, we were talking about Kim Iverson, and she was looking, okay, if you're going to have a model governor, a Trumpian governor, I think was the context here. DeSantis is a good exemplar of that next generation of leaders, that kind of thing. We'll see how he fares with this one, because, again, Florida is one of the 3 states. In fact, I think they're at the top of the list in terms of the rate of new infections, but at the very least, they're near the top, right up there. Saw DeSantis talking about that this morning on TV. In national news, at least 8 were shot in Chicago on Wednesday night, just before midnight, in the 3rd mass shooting in 6 hours in the city. This comes on the same day as the Justice Department launched gun trafficking strike forces in 5 cities, including Chicago, Los Angeles, New York, Washington, D.C., and the San Francisco Bay Area. Meanwhile, in D.C. last night, there was a shooting in the Logan Circle neighborhood on 14th Street in front of Mexico that left 2 people wounded. Jeff Bezos, the founder of Amazon and recently departed CEO of that company, who took to space earlier this week, has given $100 million each as a donation, one to 2 people, one of whom was Van Jones, CNN contributor and host over there, another of which was a chef, Jose Andres, both of which he gave these people money, apparently for doing good things, for being noble people generally. It's like a weird kind of, I don't know, I can't think of, here's another way of looking at this. This is moral patronage. Or it's like you're paying off to get into heaven. Like if I do something bad and I live a horrible life, but if I put this to the side, that's simony, or something like that, which I can also see applying here. Yeah, that's what it sounds like. Bezos is paying for his sins, that kind of thing. But it's also like, let's give good people lots of money, which I can't really think of many people doing recently. Which makes me good in some way when they do good work. Anyway, the fact that it's Van Jones just makes me chuckle inside a little bit. It's weird, man. That is so weird. That's such an off-ball. It's just weird. That's all. Yeah. It's just random. It is. Carrying on here, as part of Governor Greg Abbott's efforts to slow the number of border crossing, Texas, the state, has begun jailing illegal crossers on trespassing charges. An empty state prison in Dilley, Texas, has been converted into a detention center for these people. So far, only 10 people have been detained, but the prison will be able to hold more than 950 individuals. Activision, a company that created Call of Duty, World of Warcraft, and Crash Bandicoot, or at least, hang on a second. I'm guessing Austin wrote this headline. I get what you're saying. They did not create these games. They didn't develop them. I believe they published them. Yeah. He's saying World of Warcraft, but it's a small distinction. I'm not trying to be too critical, Austin. Anyway, Activision is being sued in California for sexual harassment and discrimination. Some of the frat boy environment, apparently, that the company inhabits, included sexual harassment by executives, open jokes about rape, apparently encouraged inappropriate behavior while drinking alcohol at the company's social gatherings known as cube crawls. That actually, I don't care, cube crawl, whatever. It sounds cool, actually. A cubicle crawling, yeah, that kind of thing. Anyway, women. Not sexual harassment. Not sexual harassment, just the cube crawl specifically. It's like a pub crawl, but cubicles. It's kind of lame, but I can get what they're going for. You're like, that sounds cool. I get you. Women were also routinely paid less for the same work as their male counterparts. One woman committed suicide on a company trip after a sexual relationship with her colleague resulted in explicit photos of her being shared around the office. Not a good thing for Activision. That's a more prominent game publisher. They're like one of the big publishers. Seeing where this goes.
There's a very inappropriate comment here. Jeffrey Toobin is on air right now. Like, not, he's still doing this job. He was able to, and it's a sad comment, but it made me think of Jeffrey Toobin, who did that on his Zoom call and still had to go back to work.
He exposed himself.
Yeah, he exposed himself.
He had been masturbating, which I can say, thank you, FCC. He had been masturbating on a Zoom call.
Not realizing
that his camera was on.
Yes, his camera was on. It's like, oh my God, Toobin. It was that. My mom was like, he's back at work. I was like, what did you think he was going to do? I don't know, but he's back at work. Like, she's just so shocked that he could show his face. I guess my point is, it's whatever you want to call it, shame, embarrassment, all of those things. People deal with that stuff in different ways. And in her case, that is that's a problem. Put it that way.
I hear you.
That's a problem.
I hear you. As we speak, in international news, the opening ceremony for the Summer Olympics in Tokyo is taking place in a nearly empty stadium. Only a few hundred dignitaries and officials are being allowed to attend this opening event. Those dignitaries and officials include American First Lady Jill Biden and French President Emmanuel Macron. The total attendance for the event is supposed to be capped at 10,000. When I say the event, I mean the Olympics as a whole. Almost all of the people attending will be locals allowed to attend the event. Of course, Tokyo, the city in which the Olympics are being held this year, is in a state of emergency due to high COVID cases, and the creative director for this event was just sacked by the local Olympic Committee for some anti-Semitic comments he made 20 plus years ago. Anyway, things are kind of in a state of disarray there. On the other hand, the opening ceremonies are taking place right now, and, nothing's on fire. Nobody's screaming from what I can tell. No shootings like there were in Chicago and D.C. last night. Chinese President Xi Jinping has paid a historically significant and culturally sensitive trip to Tibet. That's the first time the leader of China has visited the region in nearly 30 years. And the United States has launched a number of airstrikes against the Taliban in recent days, attacking near the southern province of Kandahar. Talking about that with Scott earlier, the motivation there, and just in general, our involvements in the Afghanistan war, whether it was a net positive or a net negative. We are all very clear, net negative, not a good thing. Nobody's really happy with how this thing turned out. Anyway, had that conversation, also pivoted into what current military hardware and tactics look like, what they might look like, and how deadly exactly that could get. The conflict in the Tigray region of Ethiopia is growing. Still, the 8-month-long conflict has now spilled into the neighboring region of Afar. In this neighboring region, at least 20 civilians have been killed and 54,000 have been displaced. Experts are warning of a growing need for humanitarian aid in that region, along with Tigray, the region itself. D.C., Washington, D.C., is the site of the has opened its first Amazon Fresh store. Amazon Fresh is a superstore. It's equipped with just walk-out technology. Basically, a user can scan an app on their phone to enter, and everything they exit with is automatically charged to their Amazon account. Here's the thing, Jamarl. This is Amazon Fresh. I remember hearing about this a couple of years ago. Do you remember they opened up the bookstores in D.C.? Like, there's one over in Georgetown. I remember. It's been a while since I've been down there, but you've seen this.
Well, I just started living.
Oh, you did? You were in Richmond for the longest time.
Yeah.
Yeah. You were born there.
Yeah. Born and raised.
Anyway.
So, yeah, I wouldn't know, but,
they have bookstores that operate, I believe, in this way. Amazon Fresh, I heard this idea a first couple of years ago. This is the first one they're opening up here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a good idea. I mean, look, for me, the issue is not necessarily the technologies that you bring to bear in your society. That should be a good thing. I mean, all things being equal, if you can have something that does a job better than a person, do it. Great. The issue becomes how we accommodate that in that transition and that changeover into something else. I mean, that's more of the problem than anything else. If I don't want a person in a truck for 12, 15, 16 hours to get from point A to point B. If an automated device can do it, better. And not just better, if it can do it at all. Because that person has a tendency to get tired, sick, lonely, blue. They may be doing it even when they're tired because they need the money to pay for all of that stuff. A car doesn't have to do it.
They may have to pee.
Or
defecate.
Right, or that. And you don't want it to be in bags like in Amazon workers. And so you get this thing of like, yes, I want the technology to be able to do that. The catch becomes, okay, well, now that you get the technology to do it, what do you do for the people who are doing the job in the first place? Because those people were using that same job for their well-being, their self-actualization, how they feel about themselves and their place in the world, all that stuff. For me, I'm like, yeah, get rid of the job. I don't want that person dropping french fries. I don't want that person driving that truck, but that person needs a job. Your society has to reconcile that. And I don't think at this point we have at all. Like you said, you were saying, no, there's like, just get a guy the money.
We'll give him a little bit of an annuity or something like that. Yeah, think about it. Because again, I was just thinking about this again. This is not the economically sensible move to make, but maybe in how Ford, let's come back to this actually, when I finish up headlines here. In business news, major fast food chains in the U.S. are reaching out to applicants from years ago to try and combat the worker shortage. Many people who applied to places like McDonald's, Cracker Barrel, and White Castle are digging through their trash, more like files really, and giving these applicants another chance. And again, this pairs perfectly well with the conversation we were just having about automation. I'll return to that in just a second. With that, those are our headlines. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Coming back to automation. Again, those are headlines. Quick heads up, giving people an overview of today's show. 7:30, we spoke with Mark Frost. We're talking about inflation, which is rising in case you haven't noticed, and the housing market, which Mark speculated will burst next year. We at 8:15 spoke with Scott Ritter for a good half hour, talking about the war in Afghanistan, which we're soon departing, what it cost, what it did to the region. We also talked about the modern and next generation, the current and next gen of military hardware and military doctrine, what that would look like in practice. We're kind of speculating on that. And then we're soon going to be joined by Bob Schlehuber, host of Political Misfits, also a show that airs on this network. We're going to be talking about a couple things, but I think we're going to lead off, if I'm not incorrect, with a conversation about these two parallel commissions to study January 6th.
Right.
And we'll get into that in a second. I wanted to talk about the automation thing. Coming back to this for a second, the idea is, again, this is not the economically sensitive, efficient move to make. But you remember Ford, who admittedly an anti-Semite, whatever. Ford, big industrial tycoon, he had this idea, we'll pay workers more because then they can afford to buy our products. Well, give them more pay, create this middle class. And looking back, that's like, okay, that's kind of a good idea. In the context of capitalism, that makes sense. That's a reasonable move, even though it's like in a game theoretic perspective, he might technically be losing compared to his competitors. He's doing this sort of, wiser move.
Be able to buy my product.
What did you say?
I want people to be able to buy my product.
Yeah, he's doing a slightly more thought out move that actually makes more sense if you look at it and will probably be more sustainable, that kind of thing. In the same way, possibly, Jeff Bezos or, Amazon with Bezos out of the seat, theoretically, they bring in a robot to replace a worker. That robot costs them a certain amount of money.
Right.
Couldn't they give the employee that they're displacing like an annuity or something that doesn't, again, they don't need to waste money.
He's not there anymore.
A portion of the money that they'd be spending, that they're saving, that they're making effectively.
It's no longer there.
I hear you.
I mean, there was this company. It was one, I don't know if we did the headline the other day, where the people had worked there for like 120 years. The company had been part of the community. And it was a agency bought it out and basically fired the workers because they was moving to Mexico. And they say, look, we could just make more money with the company in Mexico. We could pay these guys 30% of what we're paying you. It's very straightforward as now, in your case, what Ford was saying was, yeah, but those people can't buy the product that we're producing anymore.
I think the same
thing. They don't think that way.
No, but I think the same thing is true in this case too. If those people lose their jobs, can they buy from the cheapest seller, Amazon? Probably. Maybe. But it depends on if there's a replacement. And arguably, then there's the thing about, okay, would the government get involved? If so, is Amazon going to have to pay higher taxes? Is it going to be completely selfless?
You see my point, right?
Are there liability things that come into play at some point?
Reconcile those two streams? Because in one sense, it makes all the sense in the world from a capitalistic perspective of trying to maximize your cash. Yeah, if you have a robot to do it, it's better. Period. Straightforward. From a societal perspective, how those workers, and it's a disruption. I would even argue that it is better for the robot to do that job. Part of the problem is all of that cash is accrued in the hands of a small and increasingly smaller number of people. How do we make that juxtaposition in society where, hey, we just need less people to do certain jobs? And in some cases, the technological aspect of that stuff isn't necessarily required for human beings. We need to figure that out. And we're not there. I mean, because for us, if that person's not working, that person is immoral. That person is, lazy. That person is X. That person is Y. That's the way we frame our society, especially in regards to giving people cash. And in some cases, maybe you don't want that guy driving that bus. Maybe you don't want that guy dropping those fries. And maybe there does need to be some kind of mid-basic level of subsistence, recognizing, okay, we're not going to have the typical jobs that we typically had. But see, I'm not of mind that we run out of jobs. I think you're always going to have some soft jobs.
No, I agree with that, but it might be that less people are able to afford this stuff. Anyway, it's a longer conversation. I'm just curious if the government's going to,
How do you get involved?
At some point, it wouldn't, and I don't know exactly what it would look like, but trying to extract compensation from these companies, that they may do better to provide up front instead of being forced to do, you kind of get my point. I don't know exactly how that's going to play out, and we're kind of over time, so I want to take us into a break. We will be back in just a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Be right back on the other side of the short break.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines on Radio Sputnik. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm joined with my co-host Shane Stranahan, coming to you live out of our station in Washington, D.C. If you guys live in the area, you can catch us on radio at 105.5 FM and 1390 AM. We're also in Kansas City at 102.9 FM and 104.7 FM. If you guys are digging what Shane and I are putting down, whatever platform you're consuming this content on, give us a like and share that audio or video. If you want to join in on the conversation, you can do so with a chat, a tweet, and of course, you can reach us by phone at 202-521-1320. That is 202-521-1320. Your engagement helps makes this show what it is, so definitely don't be shy. So we were having this conversation about Nancy Pelosi and this January 6th commission that is taking place. Now, initially, there was supposed to be a bipartisan commission. And initially, it was agreed upon that Republicans and Democrats were going to join in this basically 50-50-ish commission. But that eventually fell apart. That eventually broke down. So the House was going to have its own commission, Nancy Pelosi. This eventually broke down when Nancy Pelosi didn't want to accept two of the members of the Republican Party that they were going to add to the commission. So Pelosi said, we're willing to go it alone. And you had McCarthy, who said, well, we're going to go it alone. And now you have this weird situation where an attack on the Capitol has a breakdown between the two parties that has gone askew. Now, it is unclear on whether or not this is just posturing and brinksmanship and whether or not they're going to come to some agreement in the end. But right now, it looks like you may have two separate commissions. To have a conversation about this, we're joined with Bob Schlehuber, host of Political Misfits with Michelle Witte here at Radio Sputnik. Bob.
Good morning.
What's going on, my man?
Not much.
So I have a clip of Nancy Pelosi having a conversation about this. What did she expect is kind of the question. If you say, all right, I'm going to have a commission, great. And Republicans, you can add your people, great. Who are they? Who does she think they're going to add? All of these guys are basically lined up with Trump and fealty and allegiance to Donald Trump. Whatever they want to call it, they basically say, we accept Trump. The only reason that Liz Cheney is on the outs is because she doesn't accept Trump. She doesn't accept it. She's voted with Trump like 90% of the time. Yeah. So you can't say, oh, this is a policy-oriented nonsense. And so now you have this situation where who did Pelosi think that a Republican Party that has basically backed Trump on this doesn't want to see themselves dragged through the lurch over the course of the next X number of months? Who did she think they were going to add to the commission? They were going to add people just like this. Let's play Pelosi's clip real quick. Let's play the clip, Andre.
We are working very hard to get the job done for the American people, to lower health care costs, lower pollution, raised, as I said to when we ran, we said lower health care costs, bigger paychecks, cleaner government, and that's what we are about. The cleaner government comes with the HR1 S1, combine them, the Senate resolution, the House resolution to get this done. So in any event, as I mentioned, we are here to get the job done. We cannot respond to some of the legislation until
Pelosi is slowly
winded. It's like jogging up a hill or something.
Like trying to get out what she is saying. On that one, I believe that one she's getting more so into the notion of trying to pass the bill. But Pelosi, in her speeches, she's made it very clear. I'll go it alone if I need to.
Go what alone?
Meaning the January 6th commission.
I know, but and where?
What is it mean?
Right, what are you going to do with this?
I don't. What do you think she thought this was going to turn out to be? I think that's the interesting question because I don't believe Pelosi would just.
No, she's I think she's a pretty smart lady.
Exactly.
And she knew this wasn't going anywhere. But it just shows that Republicans are being obstructionist and they need to keep January 6th in the news for as long as possible. I mean, that seems like the goal of the Democrats. There's no desire for the Democrats to actually tap into what led people here on January 6th across the country. And we've talked to people on our show, and I'm sure you guys have. Well, it's resentment. It's people feeling like they have no control over their lives. It's propaganda that's got it into people's minds. It wasn't this fealty to Donald Trump alone, and it wasn't this I don't think it was a master plan with 6 senators to sneak them in the days before to set up a plan to like tear down the Capitol. That's not what was happening. I think people are upset in this country. I think those 1,000 people, 2,000, whatever was here, are representative of a much larger populace that's out there. And if you started actually asking questions and truthfully wanted to understand what was happening, you would learn more about people's frustrations with economic conditions, with healthcare, with loss of self and place. And I think you'd get to that, and then all of a sudden Democrats would say, well, we're not doing anything to address that. So it can't be about that. It has to be about the boogeyman Donald Trump and has to stay in the news. It's like the Benghazi stuff or the Russiagate stuff. It has no Does not matter if it's linked to any truth. There's a little bit of truth, right? Like that's how good conspiracies work. There's got to be something that lines up. There's got to be some logic. But beyond that, I think she's just doing it just as it's PR.
True. And those are in some sense deeper questions that could and should be asked. But what's maybe obvious here that neither party has an incentive to ask. This is a little bit superficial. It's not my point. And it's not just clever. It's also suggestive of something. Those problems, sure, those are to blame for January 6th. But Pelosi herself is too. She was the one who, as far as I can tell, ordered the withdrawal of police, ordered lightening the load of police, the number of people attending in the Capitol area, on the Capitol building. In other words, she set up the conditions by which it was that much easier for this insurrection, whatever you want to call it, to happen. She did that. Republicans aren't going to hit her because it doesn't fit their narrative. Of course, Democrats aren't going to hit her on that. She could get hit. But isn't it weird that she made that move and we still don't know why? And that does seem to be worth, okay, why did she do that? What's the explanation there?
Yeah. I think one thing that's been really interesting is watching the Democrats simultaneously blame everything on Donald Trump the last 4 years. Everything's Trump problem, while also simultaneously not blaming Trump for anything and not even acknowledging that he exists. Because on one end, you need Donald Trump as they won Joe Biden's president because Donald Trump was president, right? It was a simple referendum. It wasn't, Joe Biden was not elected because people were excited.
Nobody was jazzed up.
They won because he was not Donald Trump. But then all of a sudden you say, well, why was Donald Trump so bad? What was his policies? And it was like, well, he was against Medicare for all. Well, so were the Democrats. We can't bring that up. He's not for truthful and aggressive action on climate change. Well, neither are the Democrats. We can't bring that up. He's for continued war and sanctions. Well, so are the Democrats. So they have to simultaneously play this like Trump's the worst thing ever, but then Trump doesn't exist at all because we're just the same. And to your point, Nancy Pelosi, they're all the same. These are all the same people.
Yeah.
They have different names on there, Democrat, Republican, but at the end of the day, who they represent. And obviously there's differences between how they think and what they go up and say on a podium.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, when you actually start to analyze their actions and what they did in the lead up, you're going to start running into these fault lines. And even just the lack of truthful, you're allowed to challenge the electoral college vote.
Yes.
Like nobody's talking about that either. Like there were certain things and mechanisms that took place on that day that were completely legal. They challenged the vote. They didn't whatever. Democrats try to do that to Donald Trump too. Barbara Lee was trying to push that on the House and rightfully so.
Yeah.
You're allowed to do that. That's in the rule book. But then all of a sudden they're playing like, oh, I can't believe they challenged the vote.
Well, I don't think, well, you know for yourself, challenging elections is taboo. To put it mildly, it's something that they, get freaked out about. Hillary Clinton, even in the situation of like Wisconsin or somewhere, when Jill Stein was challenging them, Hillary Clinton wouldn't even touch it. Right, Michigan, she wouldn't even touch it, despite the fact that it was like, challenge it, Hillary, challenge it. That's okay, I'll lump in with Jill Stein. They don't like to touch that.
Well,
Al Gore gavelled down in his own election with Bush. Was gobbling down people from Florida who was saying, we were disenfranchised. It's not something they mess around with.
That's notable, but still, we've had 4 presidents in a row whose elections have been contested in one way or another, and it seems to have been increasing in severity.
But it's...
And that includes Obama. It's easy to forget the whole birther thing of which Trump was a part. Literally,
it's the exact same
last
thing.
4 presidents in a row, their presidency has all been contested. It's ratcheting up over time.
Yeah. I mean, I guess, but there's a difference in the way that they've contested those things. If the birther thing is like, okay, Obama is illegitimate as a president. Okay, fair enough. George Bush is illegitimate as a president because he didn't, we had the Supreme Court thing.
The Russians and Trump.
Yeah, the Russians and Trump. Right,
Biden's more friendly.
But the catch became Donald Trump, or the Democrats, when they went after Trump, they went after the minds of the voters. Like it was like the Russians got into the minds of the voters with these Facebook and Twitter ads. It was that stuff. Yeah. Trump just said, the election is a fraud. Just screams it at the highest value possible that the election is a fraud. Look, I don't take any issue with him challenging the Electoral College or saying, okay, there's something wrong with the election. And then people doing the research and trying to do the court cases. All of that stuff is perfectly legal. There's no issue with that. I think people take issue with the notion of these guys trying to do a vote and all of a sudden you have all these people, massive people reading the
It's the mob. That's not the rules.
It's the mob.
Right.
It's mob made that take over.
There. Right.
What do you think? I mean, what's Nancy?
But I don't believe, but I agree with you.
What's she trying to achieve? I mean, give me like 4 scenarios. Somebody was on the inside, Donald Trump coordinated it.
I mean, is that what they're... with you, that the goal of this is, we want this in the public eye as long as possible, that Donald Trump and Republicans were doing this, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah. I think it's that. I mean, I don't know if there's anything more to it than that. Look, but personally, on an overt level, I do think there should be an investigation. I mean, I think this nonsense of having both of these things separate is weird. I think she should have accepted the two that the Republicans wanted, because what did you think they were going to do?
Well, they have other commissions going. I mean, I think that's what's also notable. On the different committees, there's different people looking into it. So it's not as if like nobody's talking about this. And you have the entire international media
and
also covering it. Yeah.
But they're not going to be talking to each other. They're going to be, this is another weird thing about it. We were talking about this off the show.
Yeah.
You have these parallel tracks in which January 6th is being investigated. Sure, politicians talk, but those committees are not the same committees. They're not necessarily going to have to share evidence or share conclusions, those kinds of things, obviously. So where is that conversation going to be had? On the one hand, in the halls of Congress, and on the other, that we don't have access to largely, and on the other, in the media, which is what's going to happen, right? You're going to have these committees, each selectively releasing things, each biased, and then we're going to play this out in the media, which means a lot of the facts that we'd hope to get from these things are going to get buried and get lost.
Yeah.
It's sad.
What do you think Jamarl, I think you might have sent this story earlier, and I'm sure you guys talked about Gretchen Whitmer's.
I was about to bring that up.
So you wonder then about the FBI's involvement.
I wrote that down.
What do you think about the investigation? If you're going to be honest about it, you're telling me there's not any FBI informants in that crowd?
All right, so let's play Tucker.
On January 6th.
Okay. This is Tucker Carlson basically hitting this bell. In addition to, COVID is...
Okay.
I have my issues with Tucker.
Sure.
Let's play this clip.
Christopher Wray refused to get on a conference call about preparation for January 6th before it happened.
Oh, there you go.
They knew it was coming. They didn't protect the building. They let the protesters in. The FBI has a long history of setting up crimes. They just did it in Michigan. We're going to get into it in a second. Why isn't there a good faith investigation into the FBI's behavior, or do Republicans somehow trust the FBI?
Well, Tucker, you may remember a few weeks ago when we had the FBI director in front of the Judiciary Committee, I asked him about what happened to the Hoopers up in the state of Alaska, their door was kicked in, they were handcuffed, held at gunpoint and interrogated for 4 hours. They weren't even in the Capitol.
Yeah, that was Jim Jordan. So here's the thing. The Gretchen Whitmer case is disturbing, to put it mildly. When I first started reading that, I thought to myself, okay, well, look, these are a bunch of guys running around in these paramilitary groups. They're probably racist and hateful, et cetera, et cetera. And so I had somewhat of a bias when I first started reasoning, and it's like, yeah, but they do have these paramilitary groups. However, there's a difference between a guy that is hateful and racist in his bedroom by himself or just muttering, as opposed to joining a group that is going to bomb some kind of bridge, that is going to abscond and take the governor, have her hogtied, and all this nonsense. It didn't seem like they were going to do that without the assistance of basically all sorts of informants, bringing people together, paying for location. I mean, that stuff is extreme. It's one thing if the agent is just there saying, all right, these guys are doing blah, 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 and you're just writing it down, and then, okay, we're busting them. That's not what this was. No. They were bringing people from all across the United States, making connections and everything else that would have not necessarily have been there otherwise. It is a wild case. Now, the existence of that is not necessarily evidence of the existence of a plot that they're talking about here or that he's implying.
Right.
Isn't it a kind of evidence for it, though?
It is not.
Not
evidence of the possibility.
It's
evidence of a possibility, but that's not necessarily evidence of the thing. I understand what he's getting at. I even understand what you're getting at.
It's ambiguous.
Look, they hated Trump. Does the hatred of Trump turn into something where they would, hey, this situation is explosive, and no, we don't need to push anything, but we just need to make sure that, hey, maybe cops don't have guns. Maybe, because that's another one. Cops didn't have weapons. They called, 3 hours? A difference between the time after they called between when they finally responded? Like, all of this stuff is taking place. And they was like, well, we didn't want it to look like Trump was trying to overthrow the country. What do you mean? It's like, but think of the scenario that you're in, the headspace that you're in when you're thinking, the president may overthrow the country. People think the president may overthrow the country. And so we don't want to have military respond when people are attacking the Capitol. How weird of a spot. Like, you're in this. So I got to be honest, I don't entirely know, just because of the weird headspace that these guys were in regards to when all of this stuff was evolving. By the same token, look, it does seem like they entrapped these guys. So I don't know. What are your thoughts? I don't believe that the feds were doing anything to try to entrap. I look at the events that took place that day, and it just looked like a bunch of weird stuff happened as it proceeded.
It was
with Donald Trump saying,
we talked. I talked to you guys that morning from the eclipse, and had no desire to talk to folks because it was during COVID, as you remember. So all those people in the videos just giving each other COVID. I mean, it was interesting too, because then you have the right come out. It's like, it's Antifa. It's undercover Antifa. Why is the right not? Or do they acknowledge FBI and entrapment and stuff? They have to, right?
Yeah. Well, I see.
So it's interesting. Why did they go to Antifa, not like the FBI?
See, the thing is, if you remember, for the longest time, the FBI had Black Lives Matter on their list. They had these socialist groups on their list. But the majority of crimes like that were taken from white right-wingers. But if you're going back to the 60s, you're talking about left-wing groups, and you're talking about African-American groups, like the civil rights groups and those type of things.
That's in the history for sure. But I remember fielding calls on this issue, and the same people that we're talking about, it's Antifa infiltrating. I remember some of the same people, at least overlapping cultures, saying that the FBI had infiltrated Antifa as well. So these were nonpartisan fringe activists who were like, the FBI is involved in everything. And I I can see what they're saying.
You can understand why, because there's always this doubt because of previous behavior.
Of course.
What was that a movie with Denzel Washington's kid? The Spike Lee movie. Where he infiltrates. He's a black guy.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Jewish
Adam. The KKK.
Exactly.
What's that?
He infiltrates the KKK.
I'll look it up.
Yeah, it's like Denzel Washington's son is a black guy, and he wants to infiltrate the KKK, but he's black, so he gets Adam. What's his name? Adam Driver. To infiltrate on his behalf, and so it's like a buddy. Yeah, it's based on a true story.
Because there's David Chappelle's Black Klansman.
Exactly.
The blind Black
That's
Klansman.
what you're talking about. That's what you're talking about. Yeah.
No, he's not talking about the blind Black Klansman.
No, you're talking about something else.
Because you were like, that's it. I was like, no, that's not what he's talking about.
Confused me. I heard Black Klansman and I pounced on it. That's the name of the movie.
Yeah.
Dave Chappelle has a Black Klansman
skit. The blind Black Klansman who doesn't know that he's black and he's hateful. Yeah.
But it shows right there that like the FBI has infiltrated. I think they have infiltrated white supremacist groups, and it's to your point earlier, where even like my hometown of Rockford, Illinois, that's where I'm from. The Cherryville Mall, which is right outside of Rockford, had a story once where it was like FBI arrest man for buying grenade launcher in mall parking lot. And you're just like, what the hell?
How would he get access to a grenade launcher?
Well, the FBI would have access. That's your point. It's like, that would never have happened, that situation, if it was not for the FBI.
Nobody knows how to get that stuff. It's like with this guy for Whitmer. They was like, okay, we're going to get explosives. I have a guy that can get explosives. FBI informant who's like, hey, who wants to give me money for explosives
That's also a sting operation. And there's like a gradient here. And sting operations, I think, are supposed to be legal, right? And then entrapment's supposed to be illegal. It's like there's a difference between... And I can't articulate it exactly, but there is very clearly a difference between being given a Molotov cocktail as an FBI informant and handing somebody a Molotov cocktail, like, go throw this out. That
what
second
about somebody
one seems
saying,
to be,
hey, I have somebody who can give you this, and you kind of, meaning you're edging it on in some way. It's like that middle ground between those two things, and it's like, where's that gradient?
There are thick and vague lines that like
cover
the
they show with
territory.
the FBI, which is interesting, and there was a great documentary. It was on that thread that we were a part of, but it was in like New Jersey where they found people at a mosque, and they say, hey, what's going on? What's your situation? They found one guy real low IQ, and so they were able to kind of manipulate him.
The other sting thing,
And the other guy had like a brother who needed a kidney transplant. And he was like, hey, man, I can get you some money to take care of your brother if you like kind of just can't take a ride with me. They eventually, long story short, get these guys to transport weapons from New Jersey into New York or New York into New Jersey. And they give him an address, and they give him an address of a synagogue, not even knowing that it was a synagogue. So they traffic the guns across state lines. So then it becomes an interstate crime, so the FBI can get involved. And they drop it off at a synagogue parking lot, not even realizing it's a synagogue. So then it's like, oh my God, an anti-Semitic attack.
Wow. They're just setting themselves
up.
But
they found people that were easily swayed in that direction. And I think when you go back to January 6th, a lot of those people are in a place of desperation. They don't feel like they have any political representation. They are easily riled up by Donald Trump, and they get pushed.
The Governor Richmond thing, same thing. If you look into people who they were going after, the guys was like, I lost my home. I didn't have, these people were poor. Some of them were arguing angry about Black Lives Matter stuff, meaning the people who were being killed, like Breonna Taylor or George Floyd. So it's like, we're not racist, we're not this, et cetera, et cetera.
This is the publicly accepted narrative about extremism, though, as far as I can tell. It's not just cultural mores reasserting themselves after the Nazis created them or Hitler wrote them up. It's that people in desperation look for ways to sort of sanctify themselves. To, okay, this isn't my fault. It was done to me by this group. That kind of thing. People in desperate situations get more extreme. And here's the thing. Here's kind of where I wanted to go for a second. Culturally, we're having this conversation about extremism, where racism is one end of the spectrum, and or racism is the spectrum, and you go along that spectrum, you get more and more extreme, and at some point you might start to get violent. But if that's the narrative, and if the fact that we see, at least in the Whitmer cases, it took the FBI to push them to violence, that the racism, even though it's latent, when it gets especially dangerous, when it gets violent, it actually takes quite a bit of work. And it seems like the government keeps doing that. In other words, how does that change our cultural narrative about bigotry, about racism, about extremism? Does it affect it?
Yeah, I would only push back and say like microaggressions are very violent. I would say that the stuff people like Ahmaud Arbery, who was chased down by 3 white vigilantes because they thought he broke into a house. The FBI didn't push them. There is plenty of white violence across this country. Road rage is violent. And I think I would only push back on that. There's plenty of violence happening.
Yeah.
But these bigger, maybe extreme stories that we hear. I mean, like, was Timothy McVeigh, was he, I don't know, it's probably maybe a bad example, but was he pushed by the FBI or was he like violent on his own?
I mean, the thing is, I don't think Bob will disagree that it exists. I think the thing is like, how often does it exist? And does it take, especially for the extreme cases, like, okay, these guys were going to blow up a building and do this and this. It's like, okay, that sounds so extreme. Is that the case?
Does it change the culture too? Does it change how we view this stuff? Because if the Whitmer story breaks and it turns out, okay, these extremists, they got violent when the FBI incited them into violence. If that becomes the narrative, I think it would.
But see, I guess the catch is that's one case. I mean, it depends on the case, right? I mean, do we know that the FBI does stuff like that? Yes, 1,000% yes. They did with civil rights, like you said, the Muslims in this very specific case. But does that change the fact that they're doing that in response to something? No, I don't think that changes that.
I think you're also I would also think of the ways in which government is inherently violent. Like the state has a monopoly on violence. Gentrification is violent.
And gets a pass
police
on it.
over, that's violent. All those things shape our culture. So does the government and its monopoly on violence and how it uses violence shape our culture? Absolutely.
Yeah, of course. No, 100%. Okay, here's another way of looking at this.
Especially good reason.
Bob, you asked this question earlier. Why aren't Republicans seizing on the Whitmer thing and looking at January 6th? Why aren't they? Why are they talking about Antifa instead
Excuse
of the FBI?
themselves. It was the FBI.
What'd you say?
I said, excuse themselves. It was the FBI. We were pushed.
Exactly. Do you think they will? Have we just not seen that yet?
I don't know.
Well, that's what Jordan is doing.
Republicans are cagey, man.
Yeah, that's what Jordan is doing. Right there, Tucker Carlson and Jordan are basically saying, hey, look at the Whitmer case. I mean, how do we know that these aren't FBI agents? Why aren't we looking at the FBI? I mean, they're going directly at it. I mean, and look, this is an extension of Trump, right? Trump went after the intel. I mean, famously doing so with certain people, fighting the intelligence community and everything else. Jordan's just an extension of it. Yeah, I think they are. I'd be shocked if they wouldn't. And
will that work? I mean, it depends on whether there's truth to it and all that stuff. I don't know.
I don't think it's going to work. I mean, we deify our intelligence services in this country.
Yeah, they just don't want to talk about it. I mean, anything that will distract, and I think if you distract enough different places, then you get people looking 12 different ways, then you can just kind of walk away slowly.
But I hear you guys getting kind of dismissive about it when there could be a there. And again, I don't want to get out ahead of myself. I'm not saying Tucker Carlson's right, but we also shouldn't assume that he's wrong, No,
I can assume he's wrong. I mean, like for example, the COVID stuff. I mean, when I see him, going after the vaccines and that type, it makes me think he's a grifter. But look, my thing is, I would need something other than, okay, the FBI does this. And so, yes, this happens in the abstract. And so, because this happens in the abstract, that it's I would just need something more than that.
10,000% agreed on that.
Yeah. But I wouldn't be shocked if they tried it.
I guess we're just kind of at that point of, again, what would a commission work to do? Like the fact that they're going to focus in and like follow these 1,000 people that were there that day and have parole for them and like lock in and just stare at those 1,000. And you're not going to talk about the other
they went into
7 million people. Was 10% of the 74 million people that voted for Trump believe that the election was stolen and Trump should be president. Let's say just back of an envelope math, 7.5 million people that agreed with that. And the government wants us to believe like these 1,000 people were uniquely bad. It's crazy to me. It's so much bigger.
This gets to the defund the police stuff. And when we were on Political Misfits, my thing was, oh, dude, poverty. It should be poverty. But it was like the defund the police had an element of it that dealt with poverty, meaning the defund the police was the big part. When you got into the details of it, you got more into the poverty and everything else. But my thing was the issue in a lot of situations with this, that the Democratic Party was going to lock in on cops. And in locking in on cops, ignore everything that's under that doesn't include cops, meaning they don't want to touch the issues of poverty. They don't want to touch the issues of things that really affect what they're complaining about, meaning the communities. People aren't getting shot in Beverly Hills like this by cops.
Yeah.
Like this is stuff in very specific and limited communities within the context of our country and everything else. And so by saying, all right, we see cops shooting people, we're going to focus on cops. We're Democrats, we're going to do something about this. And the real reasons and rationale to even get that particular environment to be in the situation that it is in the first place, to create those situations, ignored. And that's what they've done. I mean, that's why it's like the defund the police thing. It's like when you make an argument that all of those people that ransacked the Capitol didn't do it because they were having great lives.
Yeah.
They did it because of the underlying conditions, or even the Black Lives Matter stuff. I don't believe for a moment that all of those people who were protesting over the course of that year, you had blacks, whites, Hispanics, all across the board out there protesting that stuff. I don't believe that it's, oh, we're doing this because an individual was shot. I don't buy it. I think it's other stuff underlying it, just like I don't believe the Capitol thing was done just because, oh, we're just doing this entirely for Trump. Or the Watchmen group who were, poor and broke and alienated against their government.
Yeah.
There's a deeper issue there that we ignore entirely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it sounds like when you're making a point about the people
humans
who
are
raid the
complex.
Capitol.
We're complex creatures.
Yeah.
I mean, but yet our media somehow tries to break down. There's like the crime beat, there's the economic beat, there's like whatever else, the international beat. Like everything's separated out as if all these issues don't live together.
Yeah.
And it's a really horrible trick because I think they can get away with siloing and not realizing the interconnectedness of it.
I wanted to come back just for a second because I just kept thinking about this. You have these parallel. It has to do with both January 6th and the Whitmer thing. You have these parallel commissions going on because they're not going to come into contact with each other. It's not like there's going to be a consensus on the other side of this among the public about what actually happened. We're not going to know what happened. It's just going to be more narratives about what happened. If the right wing, as it seems to be happening with Carlson and with Jordan in that clip, if they pick up on the FBI notion, that's going to become part of their side, is that the FBI incited us to do this, which is interesting. It's, you can speculate about how potent that'll be, how effective it'll be, whatever. But isn't it interesting that they're shifting the narrative from this was completely okay, our government is totalitarian, the election was overthrown, to they made us do it, to the FBI made us do it. Do you see, what I'm saying? It's like walking it back a little bit.
Yeah. I think you're seeing that a little bit with COVID too, with some Republicans and people being like, yeah,
it's
maybe
real
take
now.
it.
Yeah.
Like of course half the Republican senators won't say whether or not they've had the vaccine or not. So it is interesting when people have to kind of walk back their positions and see where they retreat to.
Yeah. We might want to close it here. But
cool. Thanks, guys.
Bob Schley-Huber, thank you so much for joining us. Host of Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. That show airs every Monday through Friday from 12 to 2 p.m. Eastern. Bob Schley-Huber, Michelle Whitty, both excellent hosts of that show. And again, you two and me, we're like the three producer hosts. There
you go.
We went that direction.
We've made it.
I'm stumbling right now.
Jamal just went straight to the top.
I just went straight to the top. Right.
I mean, straight to the top. It's impressive. Anyway, Bob, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, man.
And with that, we're going into our last segment of the show today, taking your calls. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Take your calls in just a minute.
Fault Lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
Fault Lines.
202-521-1320 is the phone number if you want to call us. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And again, that number is 202-521-1320. I'm going to give a warning out, Jamarl.
Uh-oh.
This is the last segment of the show this week. We got two callers on the line. If the lines don't get filled up and we have time after we take these calls, I'm going to go into a little spiel about geothermal energy, which is actually interesting and relevant. But it's a warning. If you guys don't call in, you're going to have to listen to that. So call in, get the lines filled up. Otherwise, we might have to resort to the future of energy. Anyway, without further ado, let's go to Malik calling in from D.C. 202-521-1320 is the phone number. Malik, you're on the line. What's on your mind?
Thanks for taking my call. As a personal side, I mean, I was like the last segment was great. I give you I've mentioned before in the past that I've worked with an organization in New York City that patrolled the NYPD. In fact, we were the first organization in the country to use video cameras at the time. This was the late 90s to patrol a police department. And what ended up happening to us was we had a group of maybe about 7 people on the team, and we were backed up by original members of the Black Panther Party who pretty much guided us through that. And what ended up happening to us is several members were having their homes broken into. I had one member of the team was walking home. He was a former gang member. Someone had shined a laser rifle scope on his chest as he walked home. And myself and another member of the team, we were approached by 2 men who looked as if they were military, because I grew up in New York City. I
I know what NYPD looks like. I know how they walk. I know how they talk. I know what they sound like. These guys were definitely not from New York City, and had a guy who looked like Matthew McConaughey who wanted to walk down the block and interview us and said he wanted to take us out for drinks and discuss what we thought about certain issues. And my point in bringing this up is, but my big concern is oftentimes, and I think one of your callers called in earlier about this, is that I think the issue of principle and morality often gets lost. And I was thinking about the Activision story that you brought up. It's at what point do we discuss, the issue of, America completely being off its moral compass? Because that Activision story is a horrible story, but it points to a larger culture of corruption and a loss of, basically, like I said, a loss of moral compass in this country. And basically we're an imperialist culture that is unchecked. And I don't think that culture can be checked necessarily by journalists, even by activists, to be quite honest, because I've seen personal comrades in the past year jump on board this vaccine thing, which I think is highly immoral and unprincipled.
You think the vaccinations are immoral? Meaning I can be there with you.
I think we both disagree, but we've had this vaccine argument with Malik a couple of times in a row now, and he said a bunch of other stuff beforehand.
Fair enough. Go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
No, and that's fine, Jamal. But
it was the immoral part that got me. It's one thing to say I'm against it. It's another. Immoral is a different quality. Like if you want to say there are elements of our society that are unproductive, fair enough.
You have a lot of liberals literally liberals and progressives online who are really calling for people who have not received the vaccination to be held down and forced to receive a vaccination.
Those people are insane. Yes, I agree with you.
They are insane.
Yes, those people are insane. But I don't think that's...
I don't think they're insane. I just disagree with them radically. But it's not insanity.
If you're talking about forcibly putting somebody down and putting a vaccination in them, that's going to have larger consequences. I don't think that's a rational
100%.
response.
They just think
insane
it's
is the wrong word for it, if you want to be specific. Irrational.
And I'm sorry for nitpicking. We've got three other callers on the line, and we haven't even, I don't think, really addressed your main point here, Malik.
I just wanted to ask, where have we gone morally that we cannot debate, we cannot discuss issues of bodily autonomy, that people that said, listen, I have a right to back away from this and question the motives of our government and the people behind this whole thing.
Agreed.
I don't think we know what to do. And when you say that America is corrupt, I agree that American culture has trickled down. It's percolated down the imperialism. But who's ultimately to blame there? The elites, I think. And therefore, I guess I'm hesitant to blame Americans as such for damage done arguably by the most powerful among us, many of whom don't like Americans. If you look at the richest in this country, do they like your average American? Probably not, is my point. So I guess I'm worried about victim blaming or something here.
I think you're absolving America of blame.
And I don't think we should completely, but again, it feels like victim blaming to me, in part. And we victimize other countries too. People hurt people, but I would say that Americans are
I don't think,
not all.
I know about the victim stuff. I mean, on some level, maybe. But if you're thinking about it, it's not just a top 5%. I mean, you're talking about, let's go to callers. Yeah.
I'm sorry for interrupting. We have four callers on the line. Definitely won't have enough time for geothermal energy. Let's get to Brave calling in from Atlanta. Brave, you're on. What's going on? Or wait, Lisa. No, I'm sorry, not Brave. There was this little hassle earlier because Lisa was supposed to be on first. Lisa, you've been on the line for a while now, and you kind of dropped out. Lisa calling in from Florida, I believe. You're on. What's going on? Or Lisa from Connecticut.
Connecticut.
What's going on?
Connecticut. Hi. Oh, don't worry about the time. I'm fascinated by the conversations. I called like a good half an hour ago to talk about the Amazon thing and the Olympics thing, and now all this other stuff. It's so crazy. So let me start with the Amazon thing. You were talking about the automation of the trucks, and I have to agree with Jamal to the point where, people should be able to do something besides drive a truck for 12 hours and have to worry about getting to their destination on time and peeing in a bottle and pooping in a bag and all that thing. But if you're going to take away the jobs, you have to think about, okay, where is this food going to? Is it serving the greater good? Is this now a public utility? What do you do with the food? Is it now belonging to the people in general? Do you see what I'm saying?
No, I know what you mean, but the answer is no. It's going to a top 1% who's ever going to own the company.
But I think, Lisa, you're talking about if this stuff were to be automated and sort of publicly owned, that presumption is that, where are you going with that, Lisa?
I think, like, because I have a problem with food only going to the 1%, if you're going to have an automation thing and only the food, the fresh goods only goes to those who can afford it, then I don't agree with taking the jobs away, I guess.
I see. Okay, so what you're saying is if you create an automated system that replaces workers but uses, like, benefits the wealthy the most, they take the highest quality produce, the best meat, you save the lab-grown meat for the hoi polloi or whatever, that's kind of where you're going, is that if you create an automated system that is autocratic and very oligarchical, that's not better than people having to work. It sounds like that's kind of your point, Lisa, right?
Exactly, yeah. It's like, okay, if there's got to be some balance there, which I know is a figment of my imagination. There is not going to be a balance. But I was like, I see where Jamal's going with the automation thing, because the way it works now is not healthy.
I agree 100%. Jamarl, I'm going to pass it back to you before we move on. But real quick, I feel like a good compromise, and this is admittedly a little bit of a utopian compromise, if we develop open source systems where different people, whether you're a big business or a random homesteader, can get into automating your food production, then instead of it being all owned by corporations and all owned by the government or whatever, you'd have it kind of distributed and people would do this stuff a little bit more on their own. But Jamarl, what's your take?
Yeah, I think there should be a floor. And from the standpoint of the automating of food, yeah, I think food production should be automated, especially if you're talking about cutting down the costs, if you're talking about high quality. I mean, look, here's the thing, and I'll keep it very, very quick. Automation is a good thing under normal circumstances. If you can have something that produces your food with low amounts of human labor, how is that a bad thing? That's the point of technology. It's just that it's being used by a very tiny body of people. So, yes, Lisa, agreed, I think.
Yeah, great, thank you.
Lisa, thank you for the call. I don't recall you calling in before. I believe you're a first-time caller. If so, great to have you. Please call back in again. Thanks for that. We have Brave calling in from ATL. Brave, regular caller. What's on your mind, man?
Hey, good morning, guys. So I was trying to call that earlier for the crime conversation, and it's kind of cool because everything you guys are talking about today, they really are connected. Like the dots are just connecting, right? And so I'm going to tie on my aluminum foil waist, and I want to talk about Star Trek. I want to bring to the front Star Trek versus Star Wars, the Jetsons versus the Flintstones. You know what I'm saying? One of the cool things about the Star Wars movie, the Rise of the Skywalker, right? Because the movie kind of sucked, yeah. But the cool thing was for the first time you got to see capitalism in the movie, because Star Wars is all about the warring and the factions, the empires, and the revolutionary. But you never really get to see those real parts behind that we know are there. The capitalists who are benefiting from the war, and you got to actually see that in that Star Wars movie, that particular Star Wars movie. Star Trek. We see this great utopian society in space, but you never see the poverty that we know is just there. It's behind the wall.
But maybe it's not. I think a lot of people think it's not there. It's
not like you're thinking about. Like poverty in Star Trek is not poverty in our context. If it existed at all, and they would probably say it doesn't exist.
I make the argument that from a creative standpoint, that in Star Trek, they outsource poverty as we know it, being in like slums and ghettos, to more of an interstellar level, and certain planets and certain races coming from certain planets, and those particular races being framed as the bad guys.
Wait, Brave. Here's the thing.
But you can create that stuff. You have matter energy converters. Why do you need to have like plantations?
This is a honeypot of a conversation.
Yes,
Brave,
that's
Brave.
Too
We have
much.
two more. We have two more callers after you. I'm sorry. This is an interesting tangent, but I want to move on. Brave, great calls. But thank you for the call. Let's go to Mallory in Florida. Mallory, you're on. What's going on?
How's it going? So I was actually calling in, Shane, to give you a few minutes to talk about geothermal energy.
Oh, God, no, I'm sorry. It's okay. My intensely short pitch. I was taking all these calls. That really worked. I just have to threaten people with a kind of boring explanation and we'll get a bunch of calls. And turns out it worked. Here's the thing. I was reading a long article about this stuff last night. Turns out geothermal is actually a lot more interesting than I thought it was. And there's a lot more potential for it. For the longest time, you've had geysers, up vents, these kinds of things where you have to find it on the surface and you harvest that energy. Then you can dig a little bit deeper. There are different ways of doing this. But a very short explanation, there are new technologies that if they seem to work out, it provides constant uptime, pretty good energy anywhere around the face of the planet. That unlike solar and wind is stable. It's not intermittent. It doesn't stop when the wind stops and the sun goes down. That has, so again, 100% uptime, good energy anywhere in the world, and not too expensive. And I could get into the specifics there, but it's like actually kind of exciting. I'm actually pretty excited about it in the same way that I am about fusion. It's just that geothermal's a little bit less impractical and hypothetical, all that. That's the take, Mallory.
Am I still on?
You are.
Yeah, so actually what I wanted to finish my statement by saying is you brought up lab-grown meat, and I happen to have written my law thesis on lab-grown meat or in vitro meat, and I have to tell you, like, you know, I disagree with the fact that, like, lab-grown meat, as you would call it, would be the thing that would be for the hoi polloi, because honestly it's cleaner. It's more moral. There's no moral price.
We need you to come on the show. You want to talk about this sometime, Mallory?
We need you to come on the show.
You want to come on as a guest?
Absolutely. I would love to.
Okay. So ShaneStranahan@gmail.com is my personal email address. Also Twitter publicly. If you send us your contact info, we'd love to have you. John, I'm sorry we didn't get to you. Mallory, that sounds fantastic. We've got to close the show out. We've got to close this week out. Another great week of Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back 7 a.m. Eastern on Monday, folks. Hope you enjoy the weekend. Hope you enjoy the Olympics. Signing off, Fault Lines. See you on the other side.